Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Where, if anything, there is even more shock as the facts of the Grenfell Tower blaze begin to settle upon us than there was yesterday. Residents, as we exhaustively reported on this radio station, had warned that the building was a fire trap and that this tragedy could almost certainly have been avoided with better, local governance? I'm not sure yet what you can say with certainty, and we won't know for sure until all the reports are completed. The problem with that sometimes, and I'm going to choose my words even more carefully than usual on this, the problem with that is that if a report gets published 2-3 years down the line, then the righteous fury and indignation that many of us feel today will have dissipated. And that, of course, is contingent upon the challenge that the fury might be misplaced. I'll tell you what I mean by that. Some of the things you take away from this unfolding tragedy. I don't know what sort of beeps loudest on your register, but the Independent reported yesterday that this cladding put on the sides of the building was in part, the official line is that it's an environmental measure, presumably to provide insulation so that you don't have to have the heating on in the flats as much as you would without the cladding on the outside. I know this part of town pretty well, and I've spoken to you about it many times over the years. Oddly, it gives you an indication of London's uniquely sort of multifarious nature. The only reason that I moved my family out of that part of London was that I couldn't afford to buy a family house with a garden in it. Because the family homes around there are like 2, 3, 4 million pounds. David Cameron and George Osborne both have one. And this tower block was pretty grim. I mean, it's an old school 60s block. You've got Trellick Tower on the horizon, which was designed by the architect Goldfinger. That's an amazing piece of architecture, which has sort of undergone a form of gentrification. But Grenfell was grey and grim. And the Independent reported yesterday, with some first-hand testimony, that one of the reasonings behind... I can't quite believe the words that are about to come out of my mouth. One of the key reasons for the cladding operation to be undertaken was because the original, the extant exterior of Grenfell Tower was considered to be an eyesore by developers and or residents building and moving into the incredibly expensive property in the more gentrified parts of that corner of our capital city. I know that we have to hold off to a degree. I reject absolutely, and with a degree of passion I feel on average about once a decade, I reject absolutely the suggestion that this shouldn't be politicised. It is politics from the very top to the very bottom of that burnt-out carcass of a building. Social housing is, by its very definition, political. Poverty is, by its very definition, political. The kind of people who would ordinarily try to turn anything into a point-scoring exercise, bleating from the sidelines at the moment that this shouldn't be politicised, should really do us all a favour and keep stum. Fire service cuts are political. Public sector spending is political. Emergency services warning about tragedies being stored up unnecessarily for the future is the very essence of politics. If you don't think this is already political, absolutely, irredeemably and completely political, then I'm afraid you inhabit a planet I do not recognise. But there is a difference between politics and politicking. I have told you many times, many times, more times than I care to remember. In fact, it's a stuck record, a mantra repeated so often you've even started to tease me about it and suggest that I might have some sort of homoerotic fixation with the fire service. I have, since 2010, been telling you that this city has been subjected to a callous and morally outrageous system of government that has seen people who run into the buildings that we carry our children out of when they're burning treated like cattle, treated like scum, treated like absolutely undeserving, lead-swinging chancers who, remember, was it the Sun or the Mail that found a firefighter during the last round of industrial action who commuted to do his shifts from one of the Balearic Islands and used that as evidence that somehow they didn't deserve public support? The journalists who queued up to write columns and present programmes deriding firefighters for having the audacity to warn that assaults upon their pensions and reductions in their provisions could somehow be justified, and that when firefighters complained it was because they had such a cushy life of Riley. Spanish practices thrown around by journalists who contributed to the destruction of their own unions. But there is a difference between politics and politicking, and I don't know how helpful anger is yet, until we know more, until we know for sure what seems already to be true. So, cladding. To make the building less ugly when it appeared in the window vista of a £2-4 million property owner just over the way in North Kensington. How will we ever know if that's true? How will we ever know if that's true? Because if it was true, and conversations had taken place in which it was confirmed, in which it was suggested, in which it was agreed to, none of those people are ever going to cough, are they? None of those people are ever going to put their hands up and say, yes, actually, a key consideration in the decision to wrap flammable material around this home, around this building in which 120 families had made their home, a key part of the decision was to make that concrete carbuncle less ugly when it appears in the windows of the bankers and the traders buying properties over the road. How many times over the years have you heard firefighters on this programme tell you, not necessarily that cuts are going to create a situation like this. Let me be absolutely clear. I am not claiming that yet, and nobody can. I have firefighters telling me from the scene that their ability to fight that fire was compromised by cuts, but I do not have proof. I happen to trust them. As a human, as a father, as a man, as a Londoner, I trust them and I believe them, but as a journalist, I cannot yet endorse that claim because I haven't seen the proof. That's what they tell me. They were there. I don't know if you heard Terry on the programme yesterday. What did you take away from Terry's call most? The fact that in 30 years as a firefighter, he'd never seen anything like it. The fact that he was going back to work at 8 o'clock yesterday evening after clocking off at 10 o'clock yesterday morning with these cushy little shift patterns and these easy lives and these don't know they're born public sector employment practices. What was it you took away? The way he described not being able to understand how the people he encountered coming down the stairs as him and his colleagues were going up could breathe because they could only just about breathe with their breathing apparatus on. What was it you took away? Him saying that it would be like the only parallel he could draw would be in living memory with September the 11th and in historical memory with the Blitz. What was it? Do you know what it was for me? It was when he told us that one of his colleagues had been hit by a falling body. That's the moment when the suspicions that we were contemplating something the likes of which we haven't seen in generations began to harden. You know today that the official death toll has reached 12. I'm reliably informed there will be dozens more, and that a final figure in the region of 3 figures, up to 100, is being contemplated by the relevant authorities. So it's important that you and I remember the difference between politics and politicking, but I will not be told by anybody that poverty denying, austerity fetishizing, public service demonizing newspapers, journalists, columnists, commentators and politicians do not have urgent questions to answer. They had questions to answer on Wednesday, on Tuesday, on Monday. They had questions to answer in 2016, 2014, 2010, and they didn't, because they didn't have to answer them. But they have to answer them now. They have to answer them now. And I don't want to see those questions posed in the pages of the London Evening Standard newspaper, edited by the man who introduced austerity to this country and argued that cuts to the public sector were completely necessary. I don't want to see these questions asked by a foreign secretary who, as Mayor of London, responded verbatim. I'll play you the tape, actually. Responded verbatim to an Assembly member questioning exactly how Boris Johnson's theory that cutting fire engines would somehow improve the service. And our Foreign Secretary responded with the immortal words, "Get stuffed." I don't want him asking the questions. don't know who can answer them. Don't know where we'll find them. David Lammy, I think prematurely and unwisely, has already employed the phrase corporate manslaughter in the context of this conversation. I don't know whether or not he's right or wrong to have done that. I think he's jumped the gun personally, but I'm trying possibly too hard to walk the line between politics and politicking. That building was full of poor families, and it would not have been rendered a death trap if it had been full of wealthier people. It simply wouldn't have been. An indication of the socio-economic status of many of the residents will become clear when their insurance details emerge. People living in the richest, one of the, to my mind, most magnificent city in the world, working in the main, but not earning enough money to be able to pay contents insurance on their own flats. So they will have lost everything forever. I can't join you in getting dewy-eyed about the magnificent response of Londoners. They've responded too much, actually. If you were listening yesterday and you took up Carl's invitation to go down to Chiswick Van Hire and drop off your goods, don't do it today, please. The poor fella's got nowhere to go. Nobody wants any more stuff. It's being piled up in the streets. Such is the magnificence of London's community spirit. But it's not enough, I'm afraid. It's not enough for those of us who believe that we should try to be a little bit nicer to each other, for those of us who believe that we should try to resist this social change since the late 1970s that has seen public sector workers, teachers, nurses, doctors, firefighters, police officers somehow replaced as the people in society we should look up to and admire most, replaced by hedge fund managers and stockbrokers and bankers and lying racist demagogues who are leading this country into a period of chaos that is absolutely and utterly unavoidable. How did we let this happen to ourselves? Why does it take a tragedy like the ones yesterday, the deaths that are still being counted, for us to realise we're respecting the wrong people? We're respecting the wrong people. We've got a bloke in the cabinet who responded to criticism of his fire service cuts by telling an elected politician to get stuffed. And we got firefighters starting on 22 grand a year while Theresa May's fired political advisors walk away with a 35 grand cheque in their pocket. You check yourself when you look at the world from the perspective that someone and I looks at it. You check yourself occasionally and you think, oh, shut up, mate. Come on. Leave it with the undergraduate idealism. You can't, you've got to recognise reality. You're never going to be able, there's no magic money tree. Wind it in a bit. And then you just sometimes, you feel the planets align and you think, no, this is actually rancid. This is no way to run a country. This is no way to run a city. It's not a game. It's not a game when Boris Johnson starts bloviating and guffawing his way through predictions and accusations that his policies would provide precisely the conditions necessary for the tragedy that we saw yesterday. Cladding. What was it for? Environmentally friendly? Really? These people strike you as the kind of people who put the environment at the top of their priorities when they're deciding how to spend money? Or aesthetic camouflage of a building that should probably have been condemned but wasn't, because if they pulled it down, they wouldn't rehouse the residents in the only part of London they'd ever known as their home. They'd rehouse the residents in Clacton or at the other end of the A4. I don't know where they'd send them, but you heard on this programme the suggestion that we were looking at a form of social cleansing across the capital as long ago as 2009. But you've got to respect the difference between politics and politicking. On days like today, I don't know where it is. It's 10:17. One more thing. you know, and I'm presuming, perhaps incorrectly, that most people listening have listened a bit over the years. Obviously you haven't. In that interview I did with Brian Coleman, the head of the London Fire and Emergency Planning Authority, took place when just about half the number of people that listen now were listening to the programme. But that was a penny drop moment for me. It's actually, I think that's the day I became a journalist. When I sat opposite a man who was in charge of London's Fire and Emergency Planning Authority, and I knew he was lying. And then the microphone went off, because Boris Johnson was saying in public at the time that there was not going to be any frontline cuts, no cuts at all. This fellow was sitting in front of me telling me we were going to lose 27 appliances. And then the microphones went off and he said, do you really think Boris Johnson doesn't know exactly what's going on? I told him it was on tape and we were going to play it out live after the news, and you've never seen a man actually turn white with fear. And I thought, God, you've spent your whole life being a sort of trusting, naive little boy thinking that the people in charge would somehow deep down have our best interests at heart. Somewhere you disagree about things, you have political arguments about taxation, immigration, whatever it may be, but we're all pulling in the same direction. No one would actually turn a flat full of poor people into a potential bonfire just to save a few quid or make the view better for the rich neighbours over the road. That level of cynicism, I don't know. Maybe I spent too long in church as a kid. I just didn't think it could exist. And I saw this man sitting in this studio and thought, God, it really is a game for some people. People like this.
How can cutting fire stations, cutting fire engines, cutting firefighters' posts not be a reduction in fire cover?
Because we're
How can cutting fire stations, cutting fire engines, cutting firefighters' posts not be a reduction in fire cover?
Because we're improving fire cover, as I've said several times, and by continuing to reduce death from fire and continuing to reduce the incidence of fire. That is the name of the game. It's not about...
You lied to the people of London in your election.
Get stuffed.
Can I call on you to withdraw that remark, Matt?
I'm sorry. I apologise it just popped out. I'm very sorry.
Get stuffed. 23 minutes after 10 is the time. I'm just going to open up the phone lines now. I don't know how we're going to play it today. I'd quite like to do Mystery Hour at 12. I don't know how you feel about that. I could do with a smile. I could do with a bit of a giggle. But if you feel it's inappropriate or if, God forbid, if more details emerge, if more horrors become clear, we know that Theresa May is due to visit the scene today. Ditto the Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn. We will, of course, be covering that. So I tell you what, can you do me a favour and make the decision for me on that one? So Mystery Hour is a weekly, fun-filled sort of opportunity to have a bit of banter and mess around together. I fancy it today, possibly more than ever. But if you don't, then just let me know. And as ever on the programme, you're in charge. Joe's in Kilburn. Joe, what's going on?
Hey, James.
Hello,
yeah, good morning to you.
Hello.
I was told that you were interested in speaking with people who had any involvement with the Grenfell Action Group concerning Grenfell Tower.
Yeah, this is a group of concerned residents who, and we don't know yet whether or not the reasons behind this tragedy tally with the ones that the Grenfell Action Group predicted would cause a tragedy, but we know that they predicted a tragedy like this would unfold. What can you tell me, Joe?
Well, I mean, the Grenfell Action Group was founded by a chap called Francis O'Connor, who's since moved to Ireland, and because of his ill health, he's pretty much stayed over there and passed away, and it's now run by Eddie DeFaan. I first got involved with them in 2012. I moved into one of the blocks that's attached to Grenfell Tower, Barrington Walk. I moved in there in March 2010. And it was around 2012 I was asked to get involved in issues because they felt that they were being given the runaround when the planning permission was being granted for Lord Aldridge's new academy, his vanity project, and the new Kensington Sports Centre.
What reason? And you're not, I don't think, qualified in this area, but you're clearly a man with his ear to the ground with regard to the local community. What's the reason behind the cladding side of the refurbishment? What have you been told?
The cladding side of the refurbishment was because all the new flats that are being built, especially around BBC TV Centre and Westfield, and at the place they're calling Portobello Square, which is at the top of Portobello Road, even though we've had a Portobello Square on Portobello Road for several years.
Where the snooker club used to be? Is that where the snooker club used to be, at that end of Portobello Road?
That's up the top end, Goulburn Road end.
Yeah.
Where Emma Dent-Code used to be councillor.
Got you. She of course is the new MP. So I think I know where you're going with this, but carry on. You're describing the gentrification.
It was aesthetic reasons. That was all. That block is a terrible eyesore. And, of course, they can't have terrible eyesores, not in their multi-million-pound redevelopments, James.
Listen, I think I've put my heart fairly clearly on my sleeve this morning, but we don't know this for sure, do we? I mean, it seems to me a reasonable speculation.
Can only reach about 15...
Documents are available at the moment, James, which state that one of the main motivations...
But 8 years ago, Blaze...
...that were authorised on Grenfell...
This disaster now makes that work a priority.
Why else were they interested in recladding the outside?
Well, that's what intrigues me most this morning, and if you want to bung those documents over to me, I'm at james@lbc.co.uk. What material... Hang on, Go on, Joe, sorry.
sorry, go on.
No, you go on.
No, there was one more thing I was going to say. I mean, part of these improvement works, you'd think that the lifts would have been improved, yeah?
Well,
I suggest you drop an FOI to SCTMO and ask them, how many times since Christmas have the fire brigade been called out in order to deal with incidents involving the lifts at Grenfell Tower? So a £10 million redevelopment, and yet they couldn't even manage to fix the lifts.
8.8, but, you know, we're not here to split hairs.
9.8.
What material benefit to the people living inside the buildings does the cladding on the outside provide?
It provides none at all.
It must reduce their heating bills a bit or something like that.
I'll tell you one thing it does do. It reduces their visible light, because basically they ended up with windows that were sort of sunken in from the exterior of the building.
Of course they would be. They'd be farther away from when they were built, wouldn't they?
Yes, they would indeed. You see, so there was no real interest in it there. Loads of people in the block that I know personally, some of them I happen to know now have passed away, were totally against that from the start. You know, they were really against it from the start. And I personally heard now that the fire brigade couldn't get above the 12th floor. And so basically anyone who couldn't get down from the 12th floor or couldn't get onto the one ladder that the fire brigade were able to get onto site, you know, God knows what's happened to them, James. But to be honest, it doesn't look good, does it?
I think that's possibly the understatement of the century, Joe. And just briefly, for people who aren't across the stuff that we covered yesterday, the Grenfell Action Group has been warning specifically, Joe, about what?
They've been warning about the sort of blasé way that the redevelopment of the area was handled, because with the academy being built there used to be football pitches on the exact position where the academy is now, and there was also a public footpath that ran parallel to the Hammersmith and City line along there, and it cut from St Anne's Road over to Silchester Road. Silchester Road's the road where you've seen all of the news organisations this morning. There was a footpath along there. I attended a public meeting in 2012. Jonathan Bohr, the head of planning at Kensington and Chelsea Council, was there. And in that meeting, I specifically asked him, would that right-of-way be maintained? And he said it would. And then my second question to him was, okay, if the academy breaches any of their planning applications, can you give us residents a cast iron guarantee now that you will refuse any retrospective planning applications, or that you will not recommend them if they go towards committee? And he said that he was unable to do that. And they did breach their planning applications, and they got a few retrospective ones, and he didn't object.
Well, he's not here to defend himself or to offer an alternative. No, it's all right. I don't need to do that. I'll just give out the phone number, Joe. 03456060973 if Mr. Bohr wants to challenge.
I'd love Mr. Bohr to ring in, to be honest. I really would. I've been trying to get hold of him, and so have several other residents, for months and months and months, and yet it seems that he's always unavailable. You know, same with Robert Black, the current chief executive
of the TMO, of the Kensington and Chelsea Tenants Management Organisation.
This is another thing.
I've been looking him up as well. I don't know if it's relevant, but he cleared in excess of £140,000 last year.
Oh, he did. And, you know, I'm sure that buys him a lot of sleeping tablets, James, because, frankly, I don't know how else he sleeps at night.
Well, you're entitled to say that. Go on, last point.
Yeah, the last correspondence I had from Mr. Black was a copy of an email that was sent to me by the Grenfell Action Group in 2013, in which he said that there was no cover-ups about the redevelopment. Everyone was being perfectly open and honest with us tenants. And within a few months of that, the Grenfell Action Group received a cease and desist letter from Kensington and Chelsea's chief solicitor, who is still in post, I believe. I can't recall her name now.
I have seen that letter, and it alleged libel against named individuals. So it wasn't necessarily linked to the cladding or the fire-based issues. But no, Joe,
they're saying it's an arm's length management organisation. Yes. Well, how come then Kensington and Chelsea's lawyers were involved?
There's another question. There's another question that needs answering.
How come Kensington and Chelsea TMO were based inside Kensington and Chelsea Council's offices? They only moved in the last year or so to their new offices at the Network Hub on Kensal Road. How come when there was a perfectly adequate Lancaster West Estate Management Board? It was actually one of the first Almos founded in the UK. How come when that one was in place, Kensington and Chelsea Council didn't like it, despite their impartiality, and ensured it was shut down and the responsibilities were transferred to the TMO.
Joe, these questions need answering, but the most important prerequisite of ever getting answers is that people like you keep asking them and that you keep people like me in the loop so that we can just put your questions through the loudhailer. I have to move on now, my friend, because we're expecting a news conference from the emergency services. Dozens of people still missing.
They did a fantastic job that night, James. I saw firemen run into that building with little or no cover on themselves.
And we will no doubt speak
up. The hard work that they did.
Well, fair play to you, mate. I have to crack on. We need to go to the news, and the news itself may be interrupted if that emergency services press conference begins. The time now is 10:32. As you've heard, Theresa May has made a private visit to the scene. She hasn't spoken to the assembled media, but I'm told she has spoken to some of the people affected by this fire at Grenfell Tower. The imminent statement or press conference from the emergency services is, I suspect, likely to include the latest on the death toll and the casualty count. Similarly, there'll be a ministerial statement in the House of Commons later. Jeremy Corbyn has already drawn attention to the programme of public sector, public service cuts introduced in this country since 2010. I suspect there's probably some culpability, or responsibility is a better word, for cuts to the emergency services that predates 2010. I don't think this should be a wholly party political issue, but what I think everybody needs to keep front and centre is the knowledge that the coroner's report into the Lackenham fire in 2009 in Camberwell, that it contained recommendations that government has had for 4 years. Recommendations that would have directly addressed some of the hazards that are believed now to have contributed to the inferno in North Kensington for 4 years. And they did nothing with them. I don't, oddly, like the way that the fact that one of the housing ministers in situ during that period has become Theresa May's chief of staff, being used as some sort of stick with which to beat the Prime Minister. I don't think that there's any link between those two facts, and I don't think being the housing minister that failed to act upon that report, one of the half a dozen or so housing ministers that failed to act upon that report, does actually in any way undermine Gavin Barwell's ability to be a chief of staff to the Prime Minister. You can see why people are trying to draw parallels, but for me, they don't really work. My phone lines are open. I suspect, as things stand, that they're going to stay open until 1 o'clock, and we will talk about nothing else. But I'm in your hands, and I have to reserve the right to interrupt any of the ensuing phone calls if that emergency services press conference begins. Let's start with Charlotte, who is in Notting Hill. Charlotte, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James.
Hi,
I just really wanted to use you, based on what you were doing yesterday, appealing for donations. I've been front and centre of one of the relief stations yesterday, and I just want, you need to get it out there and on your Twitter feed that nowhere can take any more donations. And we can't turn people away because they're turning up, so we're just using our cars to get it to wherever we can, and everywhere is full. So
at the moment, however well-intentioned and how well-meaning the motivation may be, we simply don't have the bodies in place to cope with any more generous donations of food, goods, clothes, baby gear, housing, furniture, anything.
Nothing. The furniture and stuff is not a help because no one's got any homes to put it in.
Precisely.
The clothes, there is enough. Their immediate needs of toiletries and underwear and food have been met. The main thing they need now is they will need money to help rebuild their lives.
So donate. We'll double check what the kosher funds are, so to speak, because there are always some ghouls setting up fraudulent ones in these sort of situations, and we'll get those details out. Charlotte, what sort of support have you received from the official authorities as opposed to the basic British kindness of strangers?
I didn't call up to have a rant on national radio, but basically nothing.
How can that be?
I mean, we don't know. I mean, we all were saying the council, I mean, it's been so unjoined up, every church trying to do their own thing, every neighbourhood trying to do their own thing. It was amazing yesterday, but then ended at the end of the day feeling well, I don't want to say disastrous, but it felt very frustrating.
Spent is how you felt, and then as you surveyed the oceans of goods that will have no home, you sort of begin to wonder who was supposed to be in charge, who was supposed to be leading the response to this tragedy, and the answer is we still don't know. But whoever they are, they weren't there.
No, but every council in London, in the country, needs to have an emergency response officer whose responsibility this is, who has a Twitter feed, who coordinates it. We were all trying to coordinate through umpteen different Twitter feeds on whatever social media we could do. And that's why, slightly, I'm calling you, because I know you were very active yesterday giving out the addresses of places to drop. So you've got to put out there that please
no more.
Stop.
No more. I've already heard from Carl. Go on. Sorry, Charlotte.
The amazing London taxi drivers. We had 2 taxi drivers who all they did yesterday was ferry stuff that we couldn't take to another holding centre that could. But now I'm going up the taxi driver saying, if anyone asks you to go and drop something, please say you can't.
No more. Amen.
Get it out to the London cabbies. We cannot take it.
I will. I'll repeat that throughout the programme. No more donations needed or necessary. My God, what an astonishing... I mean, it's still scant given the scale of the cloud, but as silver linings go, the idea that London responded so quickly and so completely that the organisations, the volunteers dealing with the distribution of goods and help can no longer cope with the scale of donations is astonishing. And I already knew that because Carl, who rang in yesterday, I don't know if you heard, from my part of town, to say that his van hire business was at the disposal of anybody in my part of West London who wanted to send stuff into North Kensington. He got in touch with me earlier to say he can't cope with any more. No one else is taking stuff, so do not take no more donations. Don't drop them off anywhere. And then you turn your attention to the fundraising that will inevitably follow, and decent people who will put their hands in their pockets to help these families who've been left with nothing, many of whom, don't forget, will have no contents insurance. It's one of the first things you cut when you're on your uppers. Like, we're paying for that. What's the worst that can happen? I want to tell you something, and you can laugh at me or think this is inappropriate if you want, but I've mentioned it to you 2 or 3 times. You have these little moments, which I suppose you describe as sort of political moments, when you wonder why things are the way they are. And specific to the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, it's a part of London I know probably better than any other, the Notting Hill end of it. And about 3 years ago, I told you this at the time, about 3 years ago, I was walking up Kensington Park Road, which is peak gentry. I mean, peak posh. These are the 20, 30 million pound houses owned by household names and Russian plutocrats and American bankers. 1,399 properties in the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea stand empty every day. They're simply an asset that has been bought by a person who doesn't even live there. 1,399, the highest in London. And I was walking up Kensington Park Road. I swung a left into Kensington Park Gardens because I've got a mate who lives there. And there were council workmen with machines that looked like sort of glorified pneumatic drills, but with an odd appliance on the end of it, and they were doing the pavements, and I genuinely couldn't quite work out what they were doing. So I asked, I stopped and said, what are you doing? What's this? I mean, are you cleaning them? That's an odd way to clean it, because it was almost like a grinding appliance that they were using at the time. And they said, no, we've not done this before. We're I forget what the word he was that he used, something like granulating, and they were treating the pavement surface to give it more grip. They were treating the pavement surfaces in the richer end of the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, so that in the subsequent winter, if the pavement's got a bit icy, there'd be a little bit more grip on them. You know when you sand a piece of wood and it goes from being, if you use coarse sandpaper, a piece of wood can go from being smooth to having a sort of patina, a rough edge. That's what they were doing to the pavements in Kensington Park Gardens and Kensington Park Road. And that very, very, probably the smartest parts of town. They were paying the council to make the pavements grippier in the richest parts of Kensington and Chelsea. And I remember thinking at the time, that's odd. You know, I've noticed the beautiful flower arrangements that you have in the flower beds around there, and I've sort of felt my dander rise slightly at the fact that my mate's flat comes with access to a garden that's locked to everybody else, and that only residents that live in the right bit of the block and pay their subs can get into the communal gardens. But London's full of communal gardens, and one of the reasons they get looked after is that they're not open to all and sundry. So, you know, they found the money for the flowers in the municipal flower beds, and then you walk half a mile away, and you're right outside Grenfell Tower. And it's hard to square for me how the same local authority can be paying for the pavements to be made less slippy. 5, 6 workmen on duty that day to be made less slippy on the richest parts of those streets, where in the poorest parts of those streets, they've wrapped a building in flammable material because the neighbours reportedly didn't like the view. The number you need is 03456060973. We're still waiting for the emergency services press conference. We're hearing from the London Fire Brigade, of course, that they're not expecting to find any more people alive. Claire is in Shepherd's Bush. Claire, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello, Claire.
Hi there. I just wanted, I think it was the day before yesterday, you were asking people what pivotal moment when they decided to vote for Jeremy Corbyn arrived, and I think you were probably intending on continuing that very interesting conversation yesterday. I mean, I think you said as much, but obviously the horrific events of it,
yes,
which are very close to me, overtook things. But I think that I'm not sure there could be a kind of greater or more visceral manifestation of why people are moving towards Jeremy Corbyn and his ilk, of whom there are sadly very few, than this. I think that the kind of
he might not have the answers, you know. Just because he recognises the existence of the problems distinguishes him from an awful lot of other politicians, but it doesn't mean he's got any answers.
I agree, but I think what's happened is that, you know, whatever you think about the various political parties, and I think I've talked to you about this once before briefly,
yes,
even those of us who have voted Labour for years have chiefly obviously been voting New Labour, and the kind of whole neoliberal thing. And I mean, I know a lot of these people, like you. I've kind of surrounded by very entitled, very, you know, public school types and so on and so forth. So
that's not what I'm saying. You misunderstand me slightly. Most of my ex-public school mates would be on the other side of the argument from the ones who want their view improved by the installation of flammable material.
No, I agree. I'm just saying that what I'm trying to say, very
take your time,
articulately, is that when Tony Blair and then on Hillary Clinton and even President Obama, you know, the kind of great hope, all actually turn out to leave, you know, their political positions and go on holiday with Richard Branson and stuff. Even the people who we think are really out there working for the working person and so on and so forth, actually turn out to be making multi-millions and billions as a result of their political endeavours. What the kind of cynicism I think that engenders is vast, and I think that therefore people like Jeremy Corbyn and Bernie Sanders and people who, when you look into what they've been doing, they've been working away for 30, 40 years, struggling away, saying the same things for years. I'm not saying they have got the answers, but they have been working away quietly. They live in quite crap houses. Sorry, I mustn't swear. But, you know, they don't wear £3,000 suits. They don't look very good. They don't even articulate it very well.
So you see this as a rallying call for Jeremy Corbyn, because whether he has got the answers or not, he at least appears to represent the recognition of the problems and the entrenched injustices that you describe. Yes,
and I think that they don't appear entitled. They do appear to have spent their entire lives working away, as I say, on the kind of backbenches, doing a massive slog, which can't be a massive laugh either. And, you know, this thing that's now going on, you know, these things that apparently Corbyn, I'm sure you've seen this, Corbyn tried to pass a law last year to make home safe, which the Conservatives rejected.
I did see it, and just for clarity, it was an amendment to a bill that was voted down, and it was a bill designed to make it a criminal offence for private landlords to rent out properties that were, by objective standards, uninhabitable. Obviously, Grenfell Tower is not in the remit of private landlords, but I'm comfortable with you reminding us of that story and that rejected legislation, including a number of MPs on Conservative benches who voted against it while also being private landlords, because I think it does speak of a political mindset. Some of them said it would be too expensive to be a landlord if we had to, by law, make these properties habitable. So again, there's a line between politics and politicking, and Claire has not crossed it. It's 10:48. We're just still responding to the still unfolding tragedy in North Kensington yesterday, in the early hours of yesterday morning. The speed with which the building went up is the thing that has shocked people qualified to make meaningful predictions about what should happen in these sort of circumstances, and it is becoming close to irresistible to conclude that the cladding applied to the outside of the building played a fatal and utterly unexpected part in that process. The company, Newsnight's Chris Cook, did an astonishing investigation into this, and the company that provides, there are two types of panel that the cladding could consist of, both of which pass fire regulations, but one of which the company selling it reports has a higher level of fire resistance than the other. It's a little bit more expensive, but they both pass fire regs. That's an important point to make. At the point of sale, they pass fire regulations. And Newsnight journalist Chris Cook established that the ones used on Grenfell Tower had been the cheaper ones that don't boast about their higher fire-resistant qualities. So much of this stuff is going to come out, isn't it? And if it does, I don't know how you would establish, because there's nothing wrong with making a building look nicer. But if you've made it look nicer by turning it into a death trap, I can't quite yet see how that could be an out-and-out 100% accident. 10:53 is the time. Is there any reason to use the cladding that benefits the people inside, or is it almost all for the benefit of the people looking at it from the outside? David's in Notting Hill. David, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, hi, James.
Hello.
Yeah, I'm a first-time caller.
You're very welcome.
I'm a builder, but I'm passionate about architecture, and I'm just like wondering why concrete is getting such a bad name. Why is it such an eyesore? I mean, you look at architects like Zaha Hadid, who does amazing things with concrete.
Well, it might be a little premature to have this conversation, but just to put your mind at rest, I don't think there's any objective attack upon concrete itself. For example, I mean, Trellick Tower is in the same skyline as Grenfell Tower, and that's widely considered to be an architectural masterpiece after years of being maligned. But it was, I presume it was more to do with the wear and tear at Grenfell that was causing aesthetic objection rather than the actual nature of the materials used to build it.
Right.
Don't you think?
Okay. Well, I don't know. I mean, it seems to me that concrete's getting a bad name, and it's one of those materials that was used, obviously, in the 60s post-war for sorting out housing problems. And moving forward, it can be used again.
I think you've either sort of jumped the gun slightly, my friend, or you've got the wrong end of the stick on this one, because there's no the concrete is actually the building material that should protect buildings like Grenfell from seeing the fire spread internally. I like the idea of you galloping to the defence of concrete as a building material, but the people you need to be talking to are the people who decided to clad the building because it was reportedly considered ugly.
Yeah, okay.
All right, man. Mind how you go. It's 10:55. Richard is in Hemel Hempstead. Richard, what would you like to say?
Yeah, hi. A few years ago, I was working for one of the larger energy suppliers, and they would pay for carbon from housing projects. And around the time when you probably had your house cavity walls done, it became also quite grown to have external wall insulation when cavity wall wasn't suitable.
Yes.
And there's obviously grants for that. And when everyone's having their insulation done, the housing associations would approach large energy companies with their idea of their project, and then they would get funding from big companies, and that's like Green Deal and the Eco Project.
Yeah, they got axed, didn't they?
I think they did. I think there's still versions of them running. You can still get some assistance, but it was everything. It wasn't insulation in your pipe work, it was cavities, it was external. And I've been involved in many projects as the health and safety manager to go and look on the contractors fitting this stuff. And it's not just big flats. If you haven't got cavity walls, you can have it put on the outside of your house, and then they render over it rather than put in metal cladding on it. They can render over it or put what you want over it.
Yes.
And from my experience, from tower blocks to housing estates in Scotland where I've been, it was done with the purpose of reducing carbon footprint. So
you need less heating on inside the flat.
Yeah,
that's the rationale behind it.
Yeah, it cuts bills for everybody in it. It contributes to reducing, the carbon being released and energy use in total. And from my experience, that was always done in good faith. But it had the same thing as I've seen a Scottish housing estate that was probably a little run down, turned into somewhere that looks brand new and rendered, and that's a benefit to those that live there.
So it's not a conversation about cladding full stop. It's a conversation about this particular cladding, isn't it, at the moment? Yeah. And sundry other ones that have also been mentioned in various reports and warnings. The idea that it's not cladding that is necessarily wrong, but something's gone wrong in the process in this case, perhaps.
The material that they used in this one would be the same as they'd use on your house. And at the time, I'd seen reports of where people had fires on their house. As you were trying to get out of the house, this stuff was literally molten, running off the front of the house. But it was safe. It was safe when it had been rendered over, the suppliers would say. So,
but you're not going to render a 24-storey building, are you?
No, but
if
then
cost is
the idea is that the covering you put over the stuff, but if it had been rendered or whatever, protects it from the fire. So the only time these housing estates and flats that I dealt with were in danger was before they were rendered. They'd stuck the board to the walls. Yes, then that was very dangerous, and you could set light to it with your cigarette lighter and it would just melt.
Yes.
But then once it had been rendered over, it was safe. And I did some research into different products, and obviously the more expensive you got, the more fireproof you got. But obviously the energy providers, they're funding it. They organise with the housing, whatever you call them, people, who's going to be the contractor. But it's the contractor that tends to pick the material and fit it. And obviously there's a budget there. And these products are quite foamy. And if you could quite easily, if you went on get someone on the internet, go and search external wall insulation, you can get the data sheets for these materials, and you'll be able to see yourselves.
I'm going to cross now live to the press conference being given. This is Danny Cotton, the Chief Fire Officer.
At this incident behind us. So we have been present overnight. We've maintained a watching brief. We've extinguished some small pockets of isolated fire. However, you will continue for some time to see small wisps of smoke coming from the building due to the nature of the contents in the building and some of the areas that are now far more difficult to access. The ongoing plan for today is I have my specialist urban search and rescue teams and advisors who are working very closely with the local council and the building surveyors to come to a plan as to how we can make the building safe going forward, to allow my firefighters and the police to work closely together to progress through the building, doing a detailed fingertip search, looking for evidence and looking for identification of people who may have been in the building. Obviously, this will be a very slow and painstaking process. This is a large building. There will be a large amount of building work required internally. We call it internal shoring, where structures will need to be built to ensure the floors are safe. Before we do that, we are going to utilise some specialist dog training teams that we have in conjunction with the Metropolitan Police that will go through the building and the surrounding area looking for any identification of people. They're specially trained dogs, and they will be used first of all. The benefit of using those dogs is clearly they are much lighter than people and they can cover a greater area in a very short space of time. So the urban search and rescue dogs will come in first and be followed up by specialist advisors. I anticipate London Fire Brigade will be on scene here for many days to come, working with our partners to ensure that we do the best for the people who are waiting for news of their loved ones. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I think, following on from that note, it is about those that are waiting for news of their loved ones. My thoughts, I know the thoughts of all of us are with those who have been so deeply affected from the events over the last 24 hours. Yesterday was a very difficult day. Clearly it was challenging overnight, particularly for colleagues from fire. And today, as you've heard, the work really starts in earnest to ensure that we do the appropriate recovery of everybody from those premises. Sadly, I can confirm that the number of people that have died is now 17. We do believe that number will sadly increase. But from our colleagues within the health service, there are still a number of people who are receiving treatment in hospital. There are 37 people receiving treatment, of which 17 are still in critical care. Like we explained yesterday, our absolute priority for all of us is about identifying and locating those people that are still missing. It'd be wrong for me to get into numbers that I do not believe are accurate. Our Casualty Bureau number is 0800 0961 233. And if you have reported somebody missing and you now know that they're safe and well, please contact that number so we can identify those that we're still trying to find. My heart goes out to those families that are still trying to find their loved ones. Rest assured, please get in contact with us as the police, and Casualty Bureau and our specialist trained officers will be in touch with you to support you through this. It is going to take a considerable period of time, as we've heard, so we can make the building structurally safe, so we can do our job, do our investigation. We have a large team of specialist detectives who are already investigating this, and our senior detective is Detective Chief Inspector Matt Bonner. He and I will be meeting with colleagues from the Health and Safety Executive later on today to agree how we will progress the investigation from here on in. But I reiterate again, it is going to be a long and lengthy process. Again, my thanks to the community and the public for their patience which they are showing. I know this is an exceptionally difficult and challenging time. If you have any concerns about anybody, again, please contact the Police Casualty Bureau. I'd like to pay tribute to all of those who have been involved in this incident, from the first responders through to those that are supporting them, the reception centres around this area, the tremendous public support and donations, which I think is a real testament to the community spirit of Londoners. And I think we're going to take a few questions as well, if there are any.
And the Chief Fire Officer there, and Stuart Cundy from the Metropolitan Police, bringing us up to with the latest development. 17 now known to have died. Police warning that number will increase. The Chief Fire Officer reminding us that Grenfell Tower will need to be made safe from the inside. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. It's 11:03. Simon Conway has the headlines.
On FM, online, on your mobile, and on digital radio. Leading Britain's conversation. This is LBC.
From Global's newsroom, as you've just been hearing, the death toll from the Grenfell Tower fire in West London has now risen to 17. Police say that number is still expected to rise. The London Fire Brigade says it doesn't expect to find anyone else alive as crews continue to search the wreckage of the tower. The Commissioner, Danny Cotton, says there's an unknown number of bodies inside the block following yesterday's fire. She's told LBC there are some parts they can't access.
What we have left is a very large building with 24 floors, completely fire damaged. There are very small pockets of fire remaining. Smoke will come from the building for some time yet. However, the major plan going forward now is to ensure the building is safe so that we can get in with the police and do a fingertip search to look for those people we believe are still missing.
The Prime Minister has visited the scene of the fire, while the Queen has praised the generosity of volunteers. Rachel has been helping out at Latimer Community Church, one of the relief shelters nearby. She's told LBC they've been inundated with supplies.
It's hectic. There's a lot of supplies. I mean, it's very emotional because obviously there's such a beautiful community here. Everybody is contributing. Everybody's dropping off stuff. We're gratefully inundated, but what we do need is some volunteers to help us sort all this now.
NHS England says a total of 37 people are being treated in hospital following the fire, with 17 of them in critical care. The government says there will be a proper investigation into the fire. Shadow Housing Minister John Healey has told LBC immediate measures should be taken.
They should start now installing sprinklers in high-rise blocks, starting with the highest risk tower blocks, overhaul the building regulations as they promised to do 4 years ago, and and give better advice and information to residents in tower blocks about what to do when there's a fire.
And stay with LBC for the very latest through the day. In other news this morning, it's been confirmed the Queen's speech will now take place next Wednesday. It was due to be on Monday, but it's been pushed back as Theresa May tries to finalise the details of an agreement with the DUP to support her minority government. And new figures show there were a record 304 terrorism-related arrests in Great Britain in the 12 months to the end of March. It's the highest number in any financial year since records began in 2001. The LBC Markets report, a short time ago, the FTSE 100 was down 56 points at 74.18. The pound buys you $1.27 and €1.13. LBC weather, after a bright start for many, cloud and outbreaks of rain moving east, sunny spells elsewhere, and a high of 23 degrees. From Global's newsroom for LBC, I'm Simon Conway.
This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It's 7 minutes after 11. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. We will continue our conversations. As I said to you yesterday, don't feel you have to respond to any specific inquiries that I've issued. You're more than welcome just to ring in and tell me, as Charlotte did, who's been working fingers to the bone in one of the volunteer centres and was desperate for us to get the message out there that they don't need any more donations. They will need financial donations, and I will share the respectable organisations running that side of things as soon as I can, but they don't need any more donations. And poor old Carl, who rang in yesterday from Chiswick Van Hire, was getting in touch with me before I came on air this morning, saying we can't cope with any more, and people are dropping stuff off and no one is accepting it. So, God, it's big picture. It's a nice problem to have created for London. For the response to be so impressive and so personal for so many, but it has gone beyond saturation point. And conscious as I was at the top of the show of the distinction between politics and politicking, I'm just going to deal with a couple of texts that I'm not going to lie to you, gentlemen. I find the fact that you can adopt a tone like this while we're still waiting for dead bodies to be removed from that building slightly unnerving on a simply humane level, but I'll treat you with the respect that you fail to show others. This is Alan in Ilford. James, you conveniently and in my opinion deliberately omit to say that there are lots of Labour landlords in the House as well as Conservative, but why would you allow the facts, capital letters, to spoil your biased left-wing agenda? I wouldn't, Alan, and I don't think there's anything left-wing about not wanting people to die unnecessarily. If you've been led to the conclusion that there is, then you really need to start rethinking your news sources. What I said was that the people who voted against that human habitation bill were landlords on the Conservative benches, many of them. And while I'm sure you're right that there are landlords on the Labour benches as well, precisely none of them voted in that vote. 309 plus 2 tellers on the Conservative side, 205 plus 2 tellers on the Labour side, and 0 on the attendant column. So you may well be right that there are Labour landlords in the House of Commons, Alan and Ilford, but absolutely none of them voted to stop that human habitation bill fitness for human habitation bill being stopped. So I hope that helps, except I know that it won't. And let me just dig in and find you another one so that we can just be clear that we're avoiding the... Here's a good one. God, dear, I wish it was so easy to find. Absolute nonsense regarding external insulation installed because of spoiling views. It is installed to increase thermal efficiency as per Part L of the building regs, which is being pushed by all governments and has been installed on many tower blocks in London for this reason alone. This is not the first problems either, as there was a problem circa 2012 in Camden. This is from Anonymous, needless to say, but you probably won't read this or take note, as it won't aid your political prodding. Which, again, is a position you're entitled to. It's a slightly odd thing to be getting cross about while we're still counting the corpses. I can see why you're anonymous. This is a statement from Ryden, the developers. You're quite right, as we have mentioned many, many times on this programme, the environmental benefits given by this cladding are front and centre in the planning applications. This is a statement issued by the developer that did the work after the work was completed. The rain screen cladding, replacement windows and curtain wall facades have been fitted, giving the building a fresher, modern look. This statement included a quote from Nick Paget-Brown, the leader of Kensington and Chelsea Borough Council, who remarked on how happy he was to see, and I quote now, firsthand how the cladding has lifted the external appearance of the tower. That public statement, after the completion, made no reference to insulation and only discussed the change in the external appearance of the building. So I always wonder with these kind of weird tweets and texts that come into the programme whether I should address them or whether I should just point out that before you vent your spleen or void your bile ducts in this way, you could just Google stuff. You don't want to know the facts before you start making political points. You need to have a long, hard look at yourself. Catherine's in Lowestoft. Catherine, what would you like to say?
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
You're very welcome.
So you just feel so sad, but anyway, I'm trying to understand something, and I think you might be able to make logic of it because I can't. If I donate a couch to my local charity shop, beautiful couch, nothing really wrong with it, tiny bit of wear and tear, but beautiful. If it hasn't got a fire ticket on it, they can't take it. They won't take it by law. But we can put flammable cladding on a building. I'm trying to follow that through to get the logic.
There's not any logic to it that's going to satisfy you, but the grim truth is that the cladding they applied to the building had to coin your sort of phrase, it had the fire ticket on it. I mean, it had passes, two types of cladding sold by the company, and they both pass fire regulations. One of them is advertised as having higher fire-resistant qualities, and according to a BBC report last night, they elected to go with the other one.
But so those poor people in that building, if they put furniture in their home, they couldn't buy it without a fire ticket on it, and that wasn't to do with a higher flammable percentage. It was to do with yes or no, and yet we have covered a building in something that is flammable. I can't get myself.
Well, I can help you understand if you want to. I don't mean that to sound unhelpful, but the stuff that you've got with the fire ticket on it and the right temperature is still going to go up in flames. It's not being rendered uncombustible by treatment or manufacture. It's just that particularly dangerous substances and manufacturing processes have been outlawed by that dreadful thing that the Daily Mail gets so cross about, except on days like today, elfin safety, as Richard Littlejohn likes to call it. Damn elfin safety and regulations and red tape and all the harm they bring us and the nanny state. But they are not in any way perfect. Do you see what I mean? They're not never going to catch fire. So the regulations that apply to the cladding on the side of the building were passed, but it can still burn.
And it did.
And it did tragically, yeah. No one's going to argue with that adjective.
Is there a cladding that is fireproof, or is it just so not...
I'm not comfortable being cast in the role of a sort of DIY SOS on this one, Catherine. I've got to be honest with you. But I do know, and I repeat this because he's a journalist I know very well and personally, and my admiration for him brooks no bounds. Chris Cook at Newsnight has reported that there were two panels of cladding for sale from the company that supplied them, both of which pass building regulations. It's essential that is registered, but one of which boasted of enhanced fire-resistant properties, and that was not the one used.
Right. Thank you so much for explaining that to me.
Oh, well, I wish it wasn't such a grim explanation. And I mean, I've got someone here describing himself as London oil trader who is mocking the idea that anybody would have used the cladding with the higher fire-resistant properties unless they absolutely had to. I mean, why would you choose the one that was safer if the one that was unsafer was cheaper? And that's an attitude that's out there, and that's why I think it's daft to say that this situation shouldn't be politicised. You say something like that, it's politics. Why would you spend money on things that could keep people alive if you don't have to? And the cheaper one means you can keep more of the money for yourself. All these sort of weird little names on Twitter and text, and yet you can sometimes tell when people mean it. I got one fella who run that smoked salmon business. Do you remember down in the Olympic Park, Foreman's? He's got in touch overnight to respond to tweets I put out criticising Boris Johnson and talking about cuts, to describe spending other people's money as being the real tragedy. Lance Foreman is his name, and that's what he took to Twitter to say. Spending other people's money is its own tragedy. That in response to a tweet I put out reminding Boris Johnson that when he told an Assembly member querying his claim that fire service cuts somehow improved the service, he told that Assemblymember Andrew Dinsmore, I think it was, to get stuffed. But Lars Foreman, who flogged smoked salmon over in East London, spending other people's money is its own tragedy. They walk among us. It's 11:15. 17 people now confirmed dead in the Grenfell Tower inferno that continues to pose some profoundly uncomfortable questions. And like me, you will be uncomfortable answering some of them, or indeed hearing them. But it seems now things upon which we can all agree, because it is contained within the planning documents, as Joe, a representative of the Grenfell Action Group, told us they were at about 10:30. The aesthetic improvement to the building was a key ingredient to the decision to clad it. The leader of Kensington and Chelsea Borough Council spoke of how much improved aesthetically the building had been as a result of the work. There are environmental benefits, insulation benefits as well, but it's interesting to see how much focus was put on the aesthetics. Even I mean, I get this absolutely right. I think it even named some of the adjoining residential areas. Let me get this right, because I hate to misrepresent anything. This is the suggestion that the planning application paid an awful lot of attention. Here it is. It concludes with a statement, the original planning application, that the development will provide significant improvements to the physical appearance of the tower, as well as the environmental performance and the amenity of its residents. You can decide for yourself what you think was prioritised, the physical appearance of the tower or the environmental performance and the amenity of its residents, but nobody can pretend that they weren't both on the page, that they weren't both on the document. Due to its height, the tower is visible. This is the planning document published in 2014. Due to its height, the tower is visible from the adjacent Avondale Conservation Area to the south and the Ladbroke Conservation Area to the east. A planning document for the regeneration work reads, "The changes," and I quote again, "to the existing tower will improve its appearance, especially when viewed from the surrounding area." Jim Glockling is the director of the Risk Authority and technical director of the Fire Protection Association. Risk Authority is an annually funded research scheme supported by a significant group of UK insurers that conducts research in support of the development and dissemination of best practice on the protection of property and business. What are your early thoughts on what we're seeing, what we're learning, and what we already know, Jim?
Yes, thank you, James. Well, first of all, our thoughts go out to those who've been affected by this dreadful event. But the Risk Authority, on behalf of UK insurers, have been campaigning for many years now on concerns about the raised level of combustible content that we're seeing in buildings generally across the UK.
I mean, that's an incredible statement. Obviously, if you've been campaigning it for years, you've got used to it. But to my untutored ears, I mean, why on earth in 2017 are we seeing an increase in combustible materials used in building homes?
Well, absolutely. And I think we are seeing the pendulum has swung very much in pursuit of sustainability rather than resilience. And really, I think an urgent need is to redress this balance. We seem to have gone through a phase where building regulations will support sustainability at any cost. And I certainly don't believe that sufficient attention has been paid to an adequate impact analysis being made.
So why is sustainability pertinent to this conversation about Grenfell Tower?
Well, certainly it's a very topical theme. There is no doubt that there is a need to upgrade our ageing housing stock. But we need to be clear here. That's a fine pursuit, and to improve buildings visually and both in their and also in terms of their thermal performance is an absolutely fantastic pursuit. But it doesn't need to be made with products that can contribute to fire in this way. There is choice, and clearly there are good choices and bad choices.
Well, there are expensive choices and there are less expensive choices, and if they both pass the fire regulations, a cynical approach to property development and sort of capitalism would render it a no-brainer that if they both pass the fire regulations, you go with the cheaper one, even if it's less fire resistant.
Well, that could well be the case, and certainly there's an urgent need to actually look at the standards and the dependent test that determines suitability of materials being applied to applications such as this.
So what is, I mean, in terms, again, I'm confused by this dichotomy you're seeking to draw between sustainability and resilience. Why can't resilient materials also be sustainable?
Oh, well, they can be.
Concrete, for example.
Well, absolutely. I mean, certainly the buildings that we're now seeing built are nothing like the buildings of 10 years ago,
right,
which is when the building regulations were actually last reviewed. And in fact, there are huge questions to be drawn over the suitability of the rules now to these modern methods of construction and also modern methods of refurbishing buildings.
And I'm fairly confident the cladding used at Grenfell Tower was out of the choice of two from the company that supplied them, it was the less sustainable of the two.
Right, I'm sorry, I can't really comment on that.
Well, that's why I'm confused by this sustainability. It's obviously something of a hobby horse for your organisation. I'm not sure yet that it's relevant to a conversation about Grenfell Tower.
Well, no, what we do know is really there is a difference. The building regulations that we have ensure that buildings are built to a standard that should ensure evacuation before collapse.
Well, that goes, yeah.
And before today, it has achieved that very well indeed. Increasingly, there are many people have ambitions higher to make buildings resilient, and really the starting point of making buildings resilient to fire is to not stack them full and wrap them in combustible materials.
Well, exactly. I mean, it was arguable, well, not even arguably, it was more resilient before they put this stuff on it. I mean, that's one of the few things that even a complete rank amateur like me can conclude with pretty close to certainty. Jim Glockling, many thanks indeed. 23 minutes after 11 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, trying and failing to make sense of what happened in North Kensington on Tuesday night, the early hours of Wednesday morning. I'm sorry, everybody keen to do Mystery Hour today from 12. I can't. My heart's too heavy. I need to keep looking at this. I promise you I'd be the same if it was in Newcastle or Birmingham or Glasgow or anywhere else in the country. It's not just because this is my doorstep, this is my old manor, so to speak. It's because these people are Londoners, Brits, neighbours, for all of us. Hassan's in Kingston. Hassan, what made you pick up the phone?
Hello, hi. I'm a school teacher. I teach young kids, 5, 6 year olds. I'm also a father of 4, and I'm really upset.
Yeah.
And also very angry as a Londoner. I can barely contain my emotions, to be honest with you.
Okay. Well, I mean, there are certain lines I can't let you cross, but I'll let you go as close to them as possible.
Well, I want to pick up on what you spoke about. When you spoke about the groupier pavements, that they're paying money to make pavements groupier for the more affluent people.
Well, I've been told by one of my more reliable correspondents that process was undertaken in many other parts of the borough. I'm pretty sure it wasn't undertaken down on Bramley Road, but I mean, it's an example of a broader truth.
I'll give you another example. I used to live in Roehampton, in a particular part of Roehampton, which wasn't very affluent, lots of high-rises. And there used to be a library there that we used to visit. It was fantastic, a lovely, the whole community benefited from it. During the cuts, the hours for the library were dramatically reduced. So people barely got access. They closed off many parts of the library. I then, moved into Kingston, an affluent area. What have they done to the libraries? They've expanded them. Yeah, they've made them bigger. They made them more luxurious, and the people in Kingston, a particular affluent part of Kingston, they don't need the larger libraries. They don't need larger facilities.
I don't think devil's advocate is quite the right phrase, but if you're in a poorer part of town, and just to try and sort of humanise some of the decent people working in local government and councils, if you're in a poorer part of town which has schemes in place to help impoverished families, to help distressed families and libraries, and you have a council budget cut being imposed upon you by central government, then you're going to cut the libraries before you cut the organisations and schemes that help poorer families. If you're in a more affluent part of town and you've got libraries but you don't have any or as many schemes and organisations dedicated to helping poorer families, and you've had fairly hefty cuts levelled upon you by central government, you're going to cut libraries.
But I mean, in the affluent area, like in Kingston, they've expanded the libraries.
Sorry, I mean, you know, I'm trying to help here, and I think you're going to cut the libraries in an area where you carry on spending the money on poor stuff. If you haven't got any poor stuff, but you've still got to bring in cuts, then I am right. Libraries are going to be at the top of the list of things that you cut because there's nothing above them. If you're looking at what's the immediate benefit, how does this? So I presume that's part of the process. I honestly don't believe. Oh, do I, Hassan? Do I? I don't know. But I don't want to believe that they look at it and say, well, they're poor, screw them.
Well, you know, my mum, she lives in a flat, and when I look at my mum's flat, there are a new new builds for more affluent people. The light that used to come into my mum's place, you know, it's blocked. She doesn't get any light anymore.
How come? What have they done?
Well, they've raised the buildings quite high. And the light's not coming in anymore. It used to come in. They've used lovely posh blocks of flats, you know, near where my mum lives. She lives in a block of masonettes. And the light that used to come doesn't come in anymore. But if it was the other way around, you know, they'd care more about
I see what you mean.
more affluent people and how the surrounding area looks, as is the case in this terrible scenario. But when it's the other way around, it doesn't make a difference.
Yeah.
So I don't know. All these cuts and all of these things, they're taking their toll.
It would appear that way, and the Daily Mail asks on its front page, how the hell could it happen without, for a moment, apparently considering that fetishising austerity, demonising emergency service workers, and how long before they return to their usual editorial line of printing a picture of some firefighters getting a cat out of a tree and suggesting that they're all overpaid and underworked. How the hell could it happen when you lionise governments and politicians that introduce cuts that lead almost inevitably to increased danger, let's just say, increased risk? How the hell could it happen? You think you know, Hassan. You think you know how it can happen. It's because they're spending the money in the wrong places.
Yeah. If Barwell knew about this and it's in his report, and they were meant to have done a review 4 years ago, why wasn't it done? Why wasn't it carried out? All the recommendations. Why weren't they carried out? These are serious questions that have to be asked.
Well, and the answer will be that, you know, I don't think that Theresa May would do this. I think she said it to a nurse who was using a food bank in the run-up to the general election. There is no magic money tree. So why can't we have sprinklers in these flats? Retrospectively fitted sprinklers. Well, there is no magic money tree. To be brutally cynical, to play the capitalist, the toxic, the rampant capitalist at their own game, what's going to cost more? Retrospectively fitting sprinklers to flats like Grenfell Tower, or dealing with what we're dealing with now?
Yeah, exactly.
Take care, mate.
Yeah, thanks very much. Thanks very much. Okay, bye-bye.
Well, there you go. It's coming up to 11:30. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'm intrigued, and Hassan has reinvigorated my interest in the question of how the cladding on the outside of the building materially affected the quality of the life of the people on the inside. 8.8 billion quid on making the view nicer from next door, with all the attendant environmental concerns as well. But I'm beginning to wonder whether they are window dressing for the real reason behind this. And I think it's pertinent that the leader of Kensington and Chelsea Borough Council, in a statement released by the developer, didn't mention the environment once, only mentioned the view, only mentioned the aesthetics. Are you going to struggle to sell £2, £3, £4 million properties in some of London's most salubrious suburbs if you have what Prince Charles would once have called a concrete carbuncle in your sitting room window view? I don't know. It never bothered me when I lived in that part of town, but then I was never really in the market for the £2, £3, £4 million properties. It's just gone 11:30. Rachel Venables is still live at Grenfell Tower for LBC, and we join her now for an update, really, Rachel.
Yes, sadly, again, as we heard just before the top of the hour, the number of people killed in this disastrous place has risen again. We know that 17 people have been confirmed dead, but yet again, police, the fire services are convinced that that number will continue to rise. As I look over at the tower now, I can see wisps of smoke still rising up from sort of the blackened husk of all that's left. And it was in that scene where we heard earlier from Commissioner Danny Cotton of London Fire and Commander Stuart Cundy as well, who spoke.
My thoughts, I know the thoughts of all of us are with those who have been so deeply affected from the events over the last 24 hours. Yesterday was a very difficult day. Clearly it was challenging overnight, particularly for colleagues from fire. And today, as you've heard, the work really starts in earnest to ensure that we do the appropriate recovery of everybody from those premises. Sadly, I can confirm that the number of people that have died is now 17. We do believe that that number will sadly increase. And from our colleagues within the health service, there are still a number of people who are receiving treatment in hospital. There are 37 people receiving treatment, of which 17 are still in critical care. Like we explained yesterday, our absolute priority for all of us is about identifying and locating those people that are still missing. It'd be wrong for me to get into numbers that I do not believe are accurate. Our Casualty Bureau number is 0800 0961 233. And if you have reported somebody missing and you now know that they're safe and well, please contact that number so we can identify those that we're still trying to find. My heart goes out to those families that are still trying to find their loved ones. Rest assured, please get in contact with us as the police, and Casualty Bureau and our specialist trained officers will be in touch with you to support you through this. It is going to take a considerable period of time, as we've heard, so we can make the building structurally safe, so we can do our job, do our investigation. We have a large team of specialist detectives who are already investigating this, and our senior detective is Detective Chief Inspector Matt Bonner. He and I will be meeting with colleagues from the Health and Safety Executive later on today to agree how we will progress the investigation from here on in. But I reiterate again, it is going to be a long and lengthy process.
Commander Stuart Cundy there from the Met Police. He mentioned the family members saying his heart goes out to them, and it's important to remember that while all of the police and the fire crews are busy working on the streets around this tower block, there are family members going into refuge centres, sticking up pictures of missing loved ones, smiling faces next to the word missing, telephone numbers saying, if you know where, my wife, my daughter is, let me know. They're also going from hospital to hospital, but of course, as the hours get longer and they don't get any information, it becomes more and more likely that their loved one is still in that tower block, and it is going to take days, if not weeks, to actually get the numbers, the details of everything that happened there on Tuesday night out from the investigating teams.
Rachel Venables, do take care of yourself. It's 11:38. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Just to add to Rachel's report, of course, with a rather more prosaic appeal, that they categorically don't need any more donations. I'm going to keep saying this whether I need to or not, because there's no downside to it, is there? We've heard from various people involved in collection and distribution of goods that the financial fundraising will begin in earnest. Hopefully it won't have to, because, government might do something. But in the meantime, they're inundated with clothes and goods and all of the things that are Londoners queued up right across the capital and beyond, shipping them to that corner of Kensington yesterday, but now they're inundated, absolutely beyond saturation point. So do not drop off or seek to deliver any more donations. Let's go to Cassie, who's in Swiss Cottage. Cassie, what made you pick up the phone?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Cassie.
I've never phoned a radio station before, so bear with me.
It's all right. We won't tell anyone, Cassie.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
I live in a tower block. It was refurbished 8 years ago. There's 5 blocks. It's NW3 Swiss Cottage.
Yes.
The cladding that's on our blocks looks very similar to the block of flats, unfortunately, that happened the other night. And we were told at the time this cladding is going to be put on to make it look more attractable, more suitable to buyers coming in. At the same time, there was a brand new private block being built on Winchester Road, and similar colour to our blocks now. The thing I'm trying to say is that everything was done. We got new double glazing and that. Our windowsills are so bad they're made of plastic. My daughter, about 4 or 5 years ago, just her friend dropped a bit of ash on the windowsill one evening, and within a few seconds the windowsill started burning, so it did. That's how bad it is in a tower block. I'm only on the 5th floor. I'm not too high up. But still, there's no sprinklers. There's only one exit out down the stairs, and that's it.
The almost inescapable conclusion now is that the fire spread up the outside of the building, and all of the measures put in place to prevent fires spreading through buildings are confined and contingent upon the interior of the building. So they've changed the very structural nature of a building by sticking this stuff on the outside. There's nothing...
The old building was like, it was dirty looking, it was grey, we had steel windows, we had steel windowsills and that, nothing like we have now. Everything is, the windowsills are pure plastic, let alone what's in the cladding, but the cladding is the very same as...
well, there's nothing per se, there's nothing wrong with using cladding to improve the appearance of a building, up to and including the point.
Like this,
precisely.
Go up like that.
Yes,
you know?
I don't think either of us are naive enough to suggest that there's not a wisdom behind the idea to make forgive me, an ugly building look prettier, but there is a cost to that, and if the cost is that you make it a fire trap, then it's incredible, isn't it?
Yeah, that's all I wanted to say.
That's all we need to hear from you, Cassie, although do feel free to ring a radio station for the second time, ideally on a more cheerful day, and it's this question of cost that I think really does divide people politically. I think we've all pretty much established that any suggestion that you shouldn't politicise something like this is palpably absurd. Here's another one. After that smoked salmon fella, Mr. Lance Foreman over in the East End, suggesting that in response to me reminding Boris Johnson of what he did when warned about fire service cuts, how he responded to warnings from Andrew Dinsmore at a London Assembly meeting. This smoked salmon salesman from over in East London thinks that it's a tragedy when other people's money is spent. Tweeting that to me, even as the firefighters continue to search the building. Here's another one, a bloke called Rory Moore, M-A-W, who has just done a quick check. He's the bursar at Magdalen College, Oxford, of all places. Here's his line. Likes of at Mr. James O.B. think spend more of other people's money, answer to everything. Whatever you spend, tragedies happen, says the bursar at Magdalen College, Oxford. Cheap to exploit, he suggests. Likes of at Mr. James O.B. think spend more of other people's money, answer to everything. Whatever you spend, tragedies happen. This before they finished counting the bodies. Cheap to exploit. If you're a student at Magdalen College, Oxford, I'm sure he'd be very, very amenable to a cup of tea later today. Jason's in St Albans. Jason, what would you like to say?
Hi there, James. Thanks for taking the call.
You're welcome.
Funny enough is I used to live in the White City area, so I used to have a friend who actually lived in that particular building. I used to go there quite regularly, and from around 2012 to 2014, I never saw any type of investment inside that tower block. The elevators always used to be broken down. They had people walking up those stairs most of the time as well. People used to make complaints inside that block inside there as well. Thankfully, he's actually moved out. And all I can think about is those poor people who lived in those type of conditions. And for them to say that they spent £10 million investing into that building, I can honestly say I haven't seen any type of investment, inward investment that's improved around that area.
Well, they had the heating system changed, I believe, and I know that they managed to find some new flats, as it were, during the redevelopment. 3 or 4, I think, new properties that didn't previously exist were carved out of the, I don't know whether it was the community, it was a rearrangement, wasn't it, because there was the boxing gym there that got the various moves and changes. But in terms of the quality, this is what I'm trying to pin down, whether or not this programme of refurbishment, this £8.8 million materially improved the living conditions of the people living inside. And I'm being a bit sceptical. I think it must have done a bit, whatever you say.
I don't believe that for a second. I honestly don't believe that. I've actually been in that building, and for them to actually say that they actually spent that amount of money, I don't believe that. Fair enough, the heating system, because that happened in the White City block. They put some new boilers inside there, which is a great way to obviously ensure people are okay. But the quality of what you're talking about, the actual investment, to make sure that they put the safeguards in place for those people, I don't believe that was the case inside there. And what even makes it even worse is even through that whole period of time when they're making cuts inside there, people were even complaining, saying that this place is going to be a death trap if the fire came through. So the fact that this has actually happened now, is absolutely shocking. For me, it's shocking because I was even in that building as well, and I even knew that there was going to be a problem like this happening inside there, and it breaks my heart to see those type of people inside there not having that type of investment, and even the security as well. So those people who've actually left inside there, do you honestly think they're going to have that money to afford for contents insurance?
No.
The safety net inside there. These are very poor, impoverished people inside there. Now, I'm from a generation where my father worked 2 jobs in order to secure my family, our family, myself, to go for education inside there as well. Now, he's a very hard-working man, and for him to have 2 jobs just to ensure that he's covering his family, that people inside in that Tower Block area working damn well hard in order to make sure they can make ends meet, living in a very expensive city, and for them to have that type of security inside there in place, they just can't afford it. So the thing that at least a council can do is to ensure that their people are safe inside there, and they haven't got the means inside there. Boris Johnson definitely has to be put to account for this. He really does.
Well, I'm going to do something that doesn't come comfortably to me. I will remind people because a lot of people are tuning in after I played it earlier. I will indeed remind people how Boris Johnson responded to an assembly member when he was mayor, who queried Boris's insistence that you improved fire safety by cutting fire engines. I will play that in a moment, but we don't know yet that cuts have had an appreciable impact. I've been told it off the record by firefighters, but I haven't been told it by any official sources or any official organisations that cuts have had a meaningful impact on what happened at Grenfell. But what the programme of cuts and austerity has done is speak to how these people feel they are being treated by their employers. And that, to me, is, regardless of what emerges in the coming months and years about Grenfell, to me, the way that these men and women have been treated by politicians is scandalous, and it was scandalous before this happened, and it will continue to be scandalous after this happened. But I'll tell you what I'll do, Jason. I'll see if any firefighters want to talk to us today about. We spoke to Terry yesterday about, and he just literally just hung up his helmet. Back on shift at 8 o'clock, an astonishing call. But I don't know if they're allowed to talk to me on the record about stuff like that. Obviously, I can offer anonymity on air and all the usual disguises, but we don't know for sure yet. Some of the stuff I've been told involves there's a big difference between the first appliance turning up at 6 minutes and everything you need to do the best job possible turning up as quickly as possible. For example, there are various other issues. You're supposed by law to be limited to 2 runs into the building with your BA, with your breathing apparatus on, and some suggestions that some firefighters might have been compelled to break that rule by shortages of colleagues, but I don't know. That remains to be seen. In terms of the line between politics and politicking, this is about how these men and women have been treated. I make no apology for reminding you that pretty much every firefighter running into Grenfell Tower will earn less this year than Theresa May's sacked advisors, Nick Timothy and Fiona Hill, have just taken away in severance payment. 35 grand a piece they get, 22 grand a year you start on as a trainee firefighter. About 10 grand more than that, roughly, you can expect to receive pre-overtime once you've got your spurs. It's 11:49. I think the decision has made itself based on mood. We will not be doing Mystery Hour today. In fact, I don't know when we'll be able to talk about anything else. Feels different from terrorist attacks, when there's something that I know people like to pretend that they're somehow easily avoided. And I understand why people desperately reach for words like internment or deportation. Even some people who aren't particularly nasty, you just want to feel safer. This feels different because it's very hard to escape the conclusion that the residents of Grenfell Tower really could and should have been safer. In fact, I would go so far as to say it's impossible to escape the conclusion that they'd still be alive if the building hadn't been covered in cladding. That's an astonishing thought. 11:53 is the time. Ash is in Rainham. Ash, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James. I'm currently a serving fire officer in London. I'm currently off duty at the moment, but obviously I've been absolutely devastated by the scenes that.
You haven't been down there. You haven't been on that call.
No, I actually finished Tuesday morning. I mean, obviously, our hearts go out to those survivors and certainly the people that have lost loved ones.
Yes.
One thing I have picked up on though is obviously what has happened in that tower block isn't normal with fires in tower blocks. And what is quite worrying now is that people have the mindset now that they need to get out of their flat at the earliest opportunity.
Yeah, of course.
When we do visits to tower blocks and people, sort of residential care homes, most of those have a stay put policy.
Yeah.
And reason for that is normally the safest place to be is inside unless it's your property on fire. So we say to the residents, stay put. Your flat has got fire doors. It's got fire lobbies. There's fire suppression systems that should keep you safe. Obviously, what's happened in this incident has sort of maybe disproved it for that particular block.
Well, but only in the... We did cover this yesterday, but I'm more than happy to cover it again because you've just highlighted a potentially huge problem coming out of this tragedy, which is that people will react in the wrong way if they find themselves caught up in something similar. All of these, the stay put policy is contingent upon the concrete construction of the block, right, wherein any fire within a single flat, whether it's got sprinklers or not, is likely to be contained. And in fact, the residents of Grenfell, I don't know if you know this, Ash, they were told that their new doors delivered during this refurbishment would resist fire for up to half an hour and give you and your colleagues more than enough time to get there and rescue people. The fact that the fire appears to have spread on the outside of the building, and then one presumes, given that it was such a warm night and so many windows would have been open, or that if the lady from Swiss Cottage earlier is reflecting the reality of Grenfell, the window sills are made of plastic or different materials, then the fire has gone into, so it's spread on the outside and gone back into the buildings through the windows. Yeah. So I mean, unless your building has been recently covered in cladding and you're worried about it, you should still be subscribing to the stay put school of safety.
Well, I mean, tower blocks have, as you sort of alluded to, fire doors. We have fire lobbies that are safe. If people are concerned, then I really do urge them to speak to their local fire station and seek advice from them, because what we don't want is another fire in a tower block
and everybody running out of their building, of their flats, and getting into worse bother. Here's the thing, though, Ash, and I've got a horrible feeling I know the answer to this. The fire brigade haven't done a survey on this building, have they? Because if they had, they would have changed the advice.
I'm not based in that area, James, so I don't know whether they would have done. We do visits. We do visits to all high-rise buildings, and we've got a thing in place now called a PIP, which basically is a plate that goes outside the building that basically shows us the exits, where the fire lifts are. So we do regular visits to tower blocks.
No, we need to look at that then. But even then, you wouldn't know what the flipping panels are made of, because the responsibility for the regulations being observed, I think, shifted in the last few years or the last 20 years from the fire brigade to the developers.
The problem is, James, if we go to a high-rise building in January and everything seems okay, if then in March, April, May, they then start making changes to the building and don't tell us, then obviously we've got an issue. But the other thing I'd like to say to people is, if you haven't got a smoke alarm, please get a smoke alarm. You can either buy those for yourself. They're £5 or £6, or you can get. We will actually go around to your property and fit a smoke alarm for you and give you fire safety advice. So I really do urge people, if they are concerned, to speak to the local fire station and get a smoke alarm.
And the fire brigade will do this themselves. They will come to your home. They'll help you. They'll give you the advice that you need. And just because Ash won't say this, he's far too polite and diplomatic. And if it works, if the fact that they go to your homes and advise you on what to put in them and how to protect yourself and your children and your family from fire, if it works and fires therefore get prevented, politicians take the reduction in fires and use it to fire people like Ash.
James, I'm far too polite to give you an answer on that.
Of course you are, my friend.
All our concern is, and the whole of the fire service, every one of those men and women yesterday and the day before, and for the weeks ahead, all we are concerned about is the public safety. We're not interested in what the politicians have to say. We are interested in wages, because it's what pays our mortgages and pays for our children's clothes.
And determines whether or not you need to do a second job to keep yourselves afloat.
Well, but the bottom line is, James, we are there to serve the public, and their safety is our only priority.
On a lighter note, I'm going to presume I'm not the first person to point out the firefighter called Ash.
To be honest with you, James, Ash is probably the most politest thing I get called.
and that's the man who runs in as we run out. Don't forget that. Don't ever forget that. It's coming up to 12 noon. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we continue to make some sense, perhaps, of what happened in North Kensington on the early hours of yesterday morning. But God knows when we'll get closer to confidence that we can do anything to minimise, to reduce the likelihood of anything similar ever happening again. More of your calls after this. Cladding cuts, and if the Labour MP David Lammy is to be followed, corporate manslaughter even on the horizon. It's some great journalism today. The Times, for my money, leading the line. This interesting editorial down the side of some of their coverage. Tenants of social housing may think they are sheltered from the buffeting of market forces, but the reality is that their homes are often maintained, repaired and built by private companies desperate to cut costs to maximise profits for their shareholders. So Kensington and Chelsea Tenants Management Organisation, which manages Grenfell Tower and some 10,000 properties comprised of Kensington and Chelsea's social housing stock, is not for profit. We tried to tilt at this windmill yesterday, but I got a little distracted by the unfolding tragedy. But, this is the but we missed, like many housing associations, it outsources work to private companies. So clearly critics say that this practice has encouraged suppliers to cut corners to compete on price. Evidence abounds about how this has resulted in poor quality work, which in some cases has put tenants at risk. It's a very good piece, and it continues. I don't know quite where to go. The phone lines are full. I carry on talking about cuts and cladding and firefighting. It's not just the actual reduction in appliances, you know. I'm just remembering now. It's also the change to the pensions. It's changed the retirement ages of firefighters. So what realistically, if you're listening, what's the oldest? I mean, the fitness test you have to pass when you signed up for the fire service, you would have expected to retire, but the changes to the terms and conditions mean that you're still working. So running up those stairs in breathing apparatus, I'm 45 years old. I'm not sure I could make it to the first landing. These are the reasons why you can't separate a story like this from politics. It is, but this story is politics. This tragedy is politics. This is what happens when you take it out of newspaper columns and put it into our shared reality. And that's why I find my contempt for this man growing almost daily.
How can cutting fire stations, cutting fire engines, cutting firefighters' posts not be a reduction in fire cover?
Because we're
How can cutting fire stations, cutting fire engines, cutting firefighters' posts not be a reduction in fire cover?
Because we're improving fire cover, as I've said several times, and by continuing to reduce death from fire and continuing to reduce the incidence of fire. That is the name of the game. It's not about
you lied to the people of London in your
get stuck.
I think can I call on you to withdraw that remark, Matt?
Yeah. I'm sorry. I apologise it just popped out. I'm very sorry.
Yeah, very funny. Just popped out. Ha. 7 minutes after 12 is the time. Dan's in the Midlands. Dan, what made you pick up the phone?
Oh, hi, James. Yeah,
Hello,
just basically listening to people discussing the cladding and whatnot today and the cost of it. I mean, yeah. I basically sell these type of materials day in, day out. Obviously, I won't say where and wherefore. I've not been involved in any of the companies involved in this one, but
okay.
The simple fact is the type of insulation that was used in the cladding is polyethylene. If you or any of your listeners go into any DIY store, you'll see it in tubular form, and it's normally used to go around pipes, tidy cables and whatnot.
Yes.
It offers barely any insulation improvements whatsoever, and there's only one reason it will have been used, and that is simply because it was the cheapest option. Now, I come up across this sort of stuff all the time. I sell materials to people who are developing hotels, schools, hospitals, tower blocks, and basically it is always a case when a local housing association authority is involved. It is always a case of what is the cheapest option. In terms of insulation, as I say, there's 3 or 4 different.
Just to clarify, to interrupt you briefly, and I'll give you all the room you need. I mean, you speak of local authority involvement. It won't be undertaken by them. All of this work will be contracted out to private sector companies. So they agree that they can do the job for X money. The local authority go with the cheapest bid, and the cheapest bidder is essentially dedicated from that point onwards to hanging on to as much of that money as possible and spending as little as is. We should probably add at this stage legally spending as little as is legally permissible on the project that they've agreed to undertake.
That's absolutely right. And it's all down to profit and margins, and whether it's the main contractor, the subcontractor, the local authority, etc. It is all down to cost savings where they can. If they were serious about it being an insulation improvement for the residents of the tower, they would have used a different type of product, a polyurethane type cladding board, which will have been 10, 20 times as better performing in terms of insulation as the one that was on there. But it will have cost them a lot more. Hence
how much more? I know it's hard to say, but if we're looking at a...
If you say for example, if you've got... let's say if you've got a 25 mil thick sheet of the insulation of the type of... made up of the type of insulation that was in the cladding in the tower.
Yes.
And then if you compare that with a 25 mil sheet of insulation made up of, say, polyurethane or polyiso-cyanurite, for example,
yes,
insulation-wise, it will perform, 10, 12 times as good in terms of thermal properties.
So if insulation is a priority, it's polyiso-cyanurate, all the way.
But cost-wise, it will cost probably... maybe you're looking at 3 times as much.
Ah, crikey, that much.
And I mean, if they've used the type of board that's been reported they've used, if they're saying they've spent 10 million on redeveloping that particular tower block,
the cladding element of it was 2.6.
Yeah, I was going to say I would probably even say it's probably even less than that. I mean, that seems a lot.
Does it?
For what it is. So I would say it will have all come down to cost, and again, as has been mentioned, how the building appears to residents in other parts of that area.
So as a cladding supplier, and obviously you'll be keen for me to remind everybody that there are plenty of products available in your world that would be absolutely a great addition to a whole host of buildings. But as a cladding supplier, if you had to assess the priorities of this work, you would put aesthetics way above anything to do with insulation or environment.
100%. Without a shadow of a doubt, that product has been used on there for aesthetics and that reason alone.
Dan, thank you, mate. 11 minutes after 12 is the time. It is a chain of command at which every turn would deliver a profit, wouldn't it? So the landlords are the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. They outsource the management of the stock to Kensington and Chelsea Tenant Management Organisation. I'll just give you a quick heads up. I'm not normally one for pointing stuff like this out, but I think on this occasion we'll make an exception. Senior staff at the not-for-profit company which manages Grenfell Tower earned more than £650,000 last year. The Times reports that payout would have gone, they believe, to the 4 most senior managers, so something around £142,500 each more than the Prime Minister. Maybe they're good for it. So that's the company to whom the management of the housing stock has been outsourced. It's the largest such organisation in the country. That in turn hired the specialist refurbishment firm Ryden to modernise the building. That contract came in the end at £8.6 million and included the fitting of the external cladding. The external cladding job was subcontracted to a company called Harley Facades, which received £2.6 million as part of the refurbishment, and the refurbishment was undertaken with panels supplied by a Suffolk-based company with which Dan is probably familiar, called Celotex, and that is where we are at the moment. But I guess to my naive eyes, just the idea when you're subcontracting and farming out and putting public money into private sector hands, some of it always sticks. Some of that money sticks to those hands at every turn, when really it should all have been spent on the job in hand. John's in Wembley. John, what would you like to say?
First time caller to your show, James.
You're very welcome, John. You're very welcome.
Can you hear me clearly?
Well, you could probably do a slightly better job if you came off hands-free.
Is that a bit better, sir?
No, it's possibly worse. Come on, mate. Come on. What do you want to say?
Cheap owner. No. Well, I was speaking to your analyst there. I was kind of down there. I got down there about 1:30, 1:45.
On Wednesday morning, this is.
Yeah, on Wednesday morning, because I've got a nephew that lives right near, slap bang in that little circle there. And I couldn't get hold of him, and I was kind of fearful. So I went down there, and it was total mayhem at that time, James. The place was like, they lost control of it. And the fire engines didn't even get near to it for probably till about, I'll be honest, 1, 2 o'clock.
Yeah.
You know, when it really took over, you know, and was burning out, then you saw the water actually being put on it. So they lost it a long time ago, and it was down to a lot of chaos that was down there. But what I saw down there was like, I don't know, maybe you can find the word for me, James. You're pretty good with them. The whole of the crowd was just like looking at the building, and it was just, you know, you could just feel it. People were just like, you know what I mean, just, oh my God, yeah, and that's when you kept hearing you with me.
Yeah.
And you know, I just feel sorry, you know what I mean? I hope it hasn't come down to this capitalist thing, why these people have lost their lives, you know, James. I really, really do hope it hasn't come down to money. But, you know...
I don't see what else... ultimately, I don't see what else it's going to come down to. Some tragedies can be stayed and kept at bay by expenditure. Some can't. I mean, there is a grim truth to that, but it would increasingly appear to be the case that decisions were made that increased the vulnerability of that building and therefore of the people inside it. And they were essentially financial positions.
I think you're spot on, sir. I mean, I'm no great fire kind of like not expert, but that place was just the way the flames just kind of just kept on coming, and just you could see it was eating around the building. You could see it started from really outside of the building, and then it engulfed it. You understand? You could just when I got there, 2/3 of the building was alight, and then by the time I would say within 20 minutes. That side that was kind of like on light when I got there was gone, and it was eating onto the other side where the chap was with the flashlight and the crying and the hollering, James.
Oh, mate.
And there was we couldn't do nothing. We were just kind of like just stuck like there, just looking at it. No one could actually do nothing. If you could fly up there and get the people out, yeah, I would have gone up there, but it was just one of those places, James. And the thing about it, as I said, the firefighting got there very late. Actually to the building. They were in the area. Don't get me wrong, but actually to the building.
Well, this is precisely the sort of thing that will be covered by inquiries and reports. But I know that the Grenfell Action Group had expressed concerns that the redevelopment had made the curbside space either hard to access or insufficient for the number of appliances that would have been needed yesterday morning. And again, there's no guarantee that they're bang on the money or infallible, but the fact that they were drawing attention to it and people were trying to shut them up is slightly concerning, John.
Well, what can you say, James?
I don't know yet. That's my problem.
All over the place.
It is. It seems to be. 6 minutes after the first call, the first appliance arrived. That may well prove to be an almost meaningless statistic in the context of the bigger picture. In terms of what government policy has done to the fire service, we know for a fact it's reduced the number of appliances, it's reduced the number of firefighters, and crucially, it's increased the length of time that men and women have to serve. Many firefighters have told me over the last 7 years that that's a danger in and of itself, because you'll be sending people to jobs 90% of the time they'll be fine, but occasionally something will happen that demands a level of fitness they are no longer capable of attaining, because they're beyond the age at which they would have been reasonably expecting to retire. So that's why I keep coming back to this thing. If you're thinking about cutting public services, do not ask whether you used it yesterday. Ask whether you might need it tomorrow. So a quick glance at some of the other news that's unfolding. Donald Trump's travails in America continue, but this seems to me to be emblematic of our zeitgeist. A billionaire director of Uber has resigned after he made a sexist remark about how much women talk during a meeting to address the firm's sexism. 21 minutes after 12 is the time. You've got to laugh sometimes, haven't you? Because the alternatives are too grim to contemplate. Back to Grenfell Tower, back to the continuing questions regarding this cladding around the sides. There's a couple of very, very troubling contributions already in the tank, and more, no doubt, on the way. There's no suggestion yet that any laws have been broken or anything like that, although the Labour MP David Lammy has reached for the corporate manslaughter tag. To my mind, a little early, but, these are early days. But the sense that this was avoidable is becoming unavoidable. Isn't it? Everyone you speak to, and when you read this blog, which we haven't talked about today as much as we talked about yesterday, because it's gone mainstream, it's gone everywhere. This blog by the Grenfell Action Group, one of whose members, Joe, we spoke to earlier today, it pretty much pinpointed a significant amount of things that are now emerging as perhaps having happened. The warning that it would happen, that dreadful line, which I'm not going to be able to quote perfectly because I haven't got it exactly in front of me, but essentially saying we now believe that it will take a tragedy. It will take a tragedy for people to realise the truth of what we've been saying. 12:23 is the time. Victoria's in St John's Wood. Victoria, what would you like to say?
We run a property business in the London Borough of Camden. We have around 10 houses in multiple occupation, and they're all, strictly regulated by the local authority.
Is that a phone ringing in the background? I think someone might have a leaky tap in one of your properties.
Exactly. That's exactly it. But the hoops we have to go through in order to get a license, and we're quite happy to do it because we just consider it's basically there's safety regulations, and we consider the safety of our tenants to be absolutely paramount. But when we have a number of properties that are right next to council properties, and they're in a shocking state of repair.
Yes.
And when we've tried to contact the local authority to get them to do something about it, they just don't. I mean, they breach all their own regulations, and there's nobody overseeing them.
Was there ever? I mean, you sound too young to have been in the business for very long, but can you remember a time when there was a chain of command, such as it were, or a provision of oversight?
No.
No.
I think it's, you have to be prepared. I think you've got to be a tenant in the building, perhaps, but obviously not. Like with the Grenfell Tower tenants, they didn't get attention to them. They should be. Those regulations are there for a reason, and it seems crazy that the private sector have to jump through those hoops, but not the public sector.
I understand exactly what you're telling me, but it means I then have to ask you about that bill that got rejected by Parliament, the Fit for Human Habitation bill, which was going to make it an offence legally for private landlords such as yourself to fall foul of human habitation standards. So just to my untutored eye on the outside looking in, it seems a little odd for a private landlord to complain that public landlords can get away with an even a much more lax approach to tenant safety than you can.
I complain about it because it's hypocritical.
Right.
I mean,
yes.
It's very hypocritical. That they can't be overseen. And they should be overseen. There should be a body that oversees, public sector housing in London. I mean, maybe that's the mayor's duty. I don't know, but
Yeah, well, I mean, we've heard from Sadiq Khan, but again, like everybody else, he'll be waiting for more details to emerge. So it's money then, ultimately, Victoria, is that they're looking at something. Tenants, under legal aid legislation brought in by the coalition government, tenants don't really have any recourse to law anymore. They're going to struggle to find any legal representation if they want to take up a grievance against their landlord. I don't know what they can do apart from write a blog like the Grenfell Action Group did. Fat lot of good that did them. And if I'm the council and somebody says, look, my window's fallen out, or the lights are broken, or this doesn't look safe, or the gas can smell gas, and they're thinking, well, we'll have to pay to fix that. Let's just hope it goes away.
Well, it's negligence on a massive scale, isn't it? I mean, then I think they're right to bring corporate manslaughter charges.
Well, it's early, far too early, in my opinion. Although David Lammy's probably got more legal qualifications than I have. It does seem to be the case that if every box was ticked, then the boxes were inadequate. There's no evidence yet that any boxes were fraudulently ticked. 26 minutes after 12. Victoria, thank you very much. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, increasingly hard or impossible actually to escape the conclusion that this was avoidable in a way that most or many tragedies simply aren't. Ralph is in Stoke Newington. Ralph, what would you like to say?
Good afternoon, James.
Hello, mate.
I'd like to say about the fire service and the lack of equipment that they're being provided by the government. We in telecoms go to high-rise blocks of flats all the time, and we have elevated machines which can get us up to 90 metres plus.
What, from the outside?
Yeah, which is 240 foot,
Blimey.
approximately. So why haven't the fire service got that sort of pump machine where they can go to that height and then squirt water down? Because the other night on the TV, you could just see squirting up a few floors, and it seems a bit ironic that they haven't got that equipment.
Well, I mean, the short answer, if you're onto something here, and I'd have to have it confirmed by a firefighter that what you described would have helped. It seems pretty logical to me, but the short answer is when you're doing your telecoms work, you're getting paid per job. Firefighters' finances are the same regardless of how many jobs they have to go out and do.
Understandably, but obviously lives.
Hey, mate, you're preaching to the choir on this one. Of course, that's going to be the grim and grisly subtext to what we're discussing. But if you can do more jobs, and they've decided someone's done a cost-benefit ratio and said, well, get Ralph one of these cherry pickers, and he'll be able to service 24 customers tomorrow instead of 12, and it will have paid for itself by the end of next year. That simply doesn't apply in emergency services, does it?
Well, understandably, but you'd have thought there'd have been a machine that would be regional, so they could call it in within a 2-hour window, for example.
Well, this is the grimmest of all the conclusions that I've been led to by the tragedy this week, and it addresses, Ralph, thank you, mate, it addresses something we've talked about often on this programme, when I try, as we all must do, I think, unless you really want to just throw your hands up in the air and surrender to the hate and the anger. You try and give other people the benefit of the doubt. So I always used to say that Boris Johnson lives in London. His family and his children live in London. So why on earth would he do anything that could compromise their safety? I'm being led now, somewhat reluctantly, towards the conclusion that these cuts to services won't affect people who live in nice houses in nice parts of town. The fire engine can get there after 10 minutes, and a brick building, a heavy brick building in Islington or Chiswick or wherever it may be is nowhere near as vulnerable as residential properties where people are living cheek by jowl and on top of each other, slotted in like battery chickens, and in circumstances that are demonstrably less safe than they could be. So the more middle class, the wealthier you may be, the more insulated you are, in every sense of the word, from fire. And that maybe is a beginning of an answer to a question that has puzzled me for 7 years. Why would any politician do anything that compromises the safety of him or herself and their own family? I wonder if Ralph has just nudged us towards a moment of clarity. Ralph, take care. It's 12:30. That's kind of stopped me in my tracks a bit. Because if you listen to the programme on a regular basis, not only will you be aware of my obsession with the fire service and Boris Johnson's programme of cuts, you'll also know that the one thing that managed to sort of keep a lid upon my fears and suspicions was the simple fact that if you compromise the ability of an emergency service to do its job, you compromise your own safety. But I'm finding it increasingly hard to avoid the conclusion that actually you don't compromise the safety of people living in relatively, for example, developments with sprinklers in them, or developments that haven't got cladding wrapped around the side of them, or developments that are just 2-storey family homes. The work that the fire service has done in helping people make their homes safer, you'll never meet a firefighter who doesn't mention smoke alarms within 10 minutes of shaking hands. You just won't. So that they really are making us safer, and then politicians use their success in making us safer to reduce their numbers, compromise their working conditions, and then when we need them, arguably, they're not there. You heard in the news Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, has been to the scene of this tragedy. Vincent McAviney was with him, and he joins me on the line now for an update. Vincent.
Well, Jeremy's been here for about 45 minutes. He was over at the scene of the incident and then went inside the leisure centre to speak to emergency service personnel. He's now around the corner at St Clement's Church. He's just done a full television interview and is walking up towards me now. He said a few moments ago when I spoke to him that the truth must come out on this. It'll require the full weight of government to find out what's gone on. And he says the emergency services here need all the resources possible because this investigation is going to take a long time. Earlier on today, the Prime Minister Theresa May came on what was branded a private visit. She went to see the tower, went to the leisure centre as well, but didn't meet any of the members of the public around here in the neighbourhood. Jeremy Corbyn was meant to simply go between the leisure centre and this site here around the corner of the church in his car, but he decided to walk, and as he did, he walked and talked with local residents, reassuring them he would do as much as he possibly could in order to have a thorough investigation of what has happened with actions taken afterwards.
And the sort of attitude of the people that he encountered, is he helping? One often wonders when politicians visit scenes of tragedy like this afterwards, whether it's for them or for the people that they're visiting.
Well, normally when a politician visits somewhere, there is a lot of disruption. All of the roads around here are already pretty closed down. There are police cordons still in place everywhere, so it's not causing any kind of the normal disruption you get. But people here have turned out. They want to speak to Jeremy Corbyn and tell him that they've been raising these problems for a number of years and haven't been listened to. A woman pulled him over whilst I was standing waiting for him to come out, and she just said, "Jeremy, you've got to help us. No one has listened for years. I know you listen. Will you help us?" So Jeremy taking his time now, speaking to more residents in the garden of this church to find out what happened and what more can be done.
Vincent McAviney live from North Kensington, where, as you hear, Jeremy Corbyn, the Labour leader, is in the middle of a visit. I suppose it's hard to say whether it's the middle or not, given that we don't know when it's going to end. 45 minutes and counting. Theresa May was there earlier. 37 minutes after 12 is the time. I don't know if firefighters are ready to ring me yet on this. You know, there's always an open line into this studio for your profession. I think Darren is one, but up in Manchester, so presumably not involved in this operation in Kensington. What did you want to say, Darren?
Well, it's just a point about the pensions and the age of retirement, James.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, when we joined, we were told that we could do 30 years and then retire, and we used to get a bit of grief for that because we're retiring earlier than people in your average jobs. But that was
like you know, sort of really physically taxing jobs, like being the bursar of Magdalen College, Oxford, or flogging smoked salmon in East London. Yeah.
Yeah, pretty much. But the reason we could retire early also, well, there was two things. It was because we couldn't do the job physically, or potentially we couldn't do it. But there was also the fact we had to put between £350 to £400 per month into our pensions. So we'll be doing that for like 30 years. Yeah. So it's not like we haven't, kind of perhaps earned the right to do it.
Yeah.
But what happened from, 2015, they put us onto a new pension scheme, so they froze the other one and put us onto this new scheme. So what that meant was that any firefighter still currently serving had to work up until the age of 60.
When some of them could have been expecting to retire at 48, 50.
Yeah, pretty much, yeah. I mean...
And they've spent... The point is, isn't it? They've spent 25 years with that finish line in sight.
Yeah. I mean, I could retire at the age of... I'm 46 now. I could have retired at the age of 52, but now I'm going to have to work up until 60, which, I mean, it's fair enough. Other people aren't working that long. But whether I could do the job at that age, who knows? But I'm putting in more money now, and I'm going to get even less at the age of 60, even though I've been doing it for another 7.5 years.
And... that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be less good at the job. You're just going to have to do it for longer.
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, I've seen guys retiring at the station in their early to mid 50s, and they really do struggle to do it.
Well, that's the fear. And what tests are in place? What hoops does one have to jump through, either metaphorically or literally, Darren, to prove that you are or are not fit enough to carry on doing the job for, in some cases, up to a decade longer than you were expecting to?
Well, they've just actually, they're trying to introduce a new fitness test now. Now, they haven't fully rolled it out because there's a few guys that are worried that they're not going to be able to pass it. But there's also a worry, I think, from the management that if we don't pass it, they're going to be stuck with not being able to put bums on seats on fire engines because this test itself might be too physically demanding.
And how's that going to work, though? Because if you wanted to, I mean, do you know what financial provision will be in place for people who don't pass? Are they going to get full pension early? Because then everybody's going to deliberately fail, or they don't get their full pension early, which means they get punished for being physically incapable of doing the job, even in cases where that incapability might have been linked to doing the job so well for so long.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, this is the thing that the union's been saying. They've been trying to get the message out that they're making the pension unattainable. So they're getting us to sign up to this pension, which a lot of the new people coming into the job now will not be able to get because they won't be able to do it. And there's no sideways movements to shift them. There's no other office jobs that they can do.
And this is a logjam and a massive inconvenience for personnel that you're right to point out and remind us the FBU has been shouting about since way before 2015, since that, and down in London, since 2010 and before.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I don't know if people are aware, but the FBU are actually fighting a court battle now under the ruling of age discrimination. I think the judges are as well, because a few judges have had the same problems with their pensions too. So, I mean, it's an ongoing process. I think that we actually lost the actual first case, and it's gone to appeal.
Well, I'll do some swatting up on that, and thanks thanks for the heads up. Don't answer this if I'm out of line, all right? But I mean, you won't know this, you're up in Manchester, but I've been banging on about fire service and cuts and the politics of austerity for almost as long as I've had this job. And today, it's taken this tragedy for me to realise that when your powers are reduced, whether through cuts to personnel, whether through extension of serving periods into an area where you might not be up to the job as much as you were, whether it's a reduction in the amount of materials that you have, appliances, equipment. I've always found it, the one area in which I could believe the politicians when they were telling me that they weren't making everybody less safe was where I used to think, well, no, they live in this town as well. Why would they do anything that makes them less safe? Is the vulnerability to fire very different according to how wealthy you are or how wealthy the area, the home in which you live is?
Yeah, well, all the studies seem to show that fire
have I missed this?
Fire affects most of the people that die in fires generally tend to be on the lower scale or on the lower social scale.
Because they're going to be more likely to have fire escapes that have been shut up by a landlord who shouldn't have shut it up, cheap appliances, plugs piling in on the sockets. All of these things are so obviously. It's possible to cut the fire service if you live in a nice house in a leafy part of town. It's not going to make you less safe. But if you live in a 24-storey tower block that's wrapped in inflammable cladding, then it is. It's not even controversial, is it, Darren?
No. Study after study shows that there's a correlation between poverty and fire deaths.
And that therefore means there's a correlation between wealth and fire cuts. Darren, thank you, mate. Thank you very much indeed. It's coming up to 12:45. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I always feel it a little bit of an affront to my professional sensibilities when I see decent people I like on social media saying you won't see this in mainstream media. So just to address that claim in the case of one particular clip, I want you to hear, given the backdrop of the political backdrop in the country at the moment, where if you commit a crime and you are a Muslim, it's a crime considered 100 times worse than it would be if it had been committed by a non-Muslim in this country. I just want you to hear what a woman who was in tears on the pavement quite soon after yesterday's tragedy began to unfold had to say about one of the reasons why more people are not currently missing and or dead.
If it wasn't for all these young Muslim boys round here helping us, coming from mosques, the people would have dead. Enough more people would have dead. Enough more people. They want to talk about them when they do wrong and all these kind of things. When they're doing bad, when they're doing good, they were the first people with bags of water giving to people, helping people, running growing and telling people all over, not just all over growing, all over,
not just from all over, the whole of Latimer, everywhere, Edward Woods, all over.
I mentioned that because the Sun newspaper carried a headline last week that said we need less Islam, and ever since it was published I've found myself wondering what the difference is between that and saying we need fewer Jews. And I can't really come up with a difference, but I can come up with an antidote, and that woman is it. It's 12:45. It's like we go into a vortex together on days like this and yesterday, isn't it? It's I don't even notice what time it is, even though I repeat it every 10 minutes or so, and suddenly it's nearly handover time. Adrian is in Fulham. Adrian, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, I picked up the phone today, James, because I'm a serving firefighter and was a part of the initial attendance on the job last night. Well, yesterday morning, should I say. But firstly, before I get into any of that, I'd just like to say that I think that we all think you are a legend in the fire brigade. You always have provided us with a voice. And I've been meaning to phone and speak to you on many issues for a long time and never really had the courage.
Courage? Courage?
Yeah, believe it or not, the courage. But yeah, I'd just like to say thank you very much for everything that you do.
Well, yeah, all right, but I think I'll say thank you to you, and it'll be worth a little bit more than what you've said to me. What happened yesterday, mate?
Well, my crew was mobilised at about 2 a.m. It was a 40 pump fire at the time, and on arrival what we saw was something from a movie scene, mate, to be quite honest. It was just simply breathtaking and unbelievable. So we walked in through the crowds to join our colleagues, and it was just complete pandemonium. We had casualties being ferried left, right and centre, and we immediately got to work in very, very difficult circumstances. It's something that I pray to God that we never have to witness anything like that again, to be honest, mate. Some very harrowing stories, which I can't obviously get into on air. Of course. But, a lot of the guys have experienced a lot of stuff that will live with them for a very, very long time. We even people like me who hold your service in the highest of regards, we forget that you've got normal days, even normal fires, incidents that perhaps you'll deal with similar circumstances on several occasions. But what became clear pretty quickly yesterday was that no one had seen anything like this before. None of you had. Definitely not. I mean, we do high-rise jobs can be difficult. They are the worst jobs that we incorporate as firefighters, and they can be quite dangerous. But this fire did not behave as a high-rise job behaved. We know where it started, and to have that result so quickly in these circumstances is just unbelievable. There's definitely something gone seriously wrong here. I don't want to compromise myself by telling you exactly what I feel, because the brigade are obviously going to conduct a full investigation, but this is not how high-rise jobs behave, and it's just unbelievable. It's just really unbelievable.
You may not want to answer this question either, and my goodness, you don't have to. Did you feel on the ground that you were sufficiently equipped and crewed to do the best possible job?
To be honest, it's a difficult question to answer, because we've got a lot of our crews that were there. So we obviously know that we've had a lot of cuts at this moment in time. But one thing I will say is that we're having 40 pumps on this incident. If another major incident takes place, I know we would definitely be stretched because of our resources. So without trying to be too political and compromise myself in any way, the crews that were there, we did the best that we could with what we had.
Well, that I know without asking, that you did the best that you did with what you had. But the other question will hang over us for some time, I think. So you clocked off at 2 o'clock yesterday afternoon?
That's right, yeah.
When were you back on, or when are you back on?
Well, my crew left there at 2 a.m. We was one of the last Bridgewatch crews to leave, I believe.
2 p.m.
And we had to 2 p.m. Sorry, yeah. So we got there at 2 a.m. Some of the crews, I had a very good friend of mine that was at North Kent, and their crew was their initial, and they only left probably about an hour or two before us. So there were some seriously long shifts going on. Yeah. There was a lot of guys working incredibly hard and willing to put themselves on the line, even though at the point of exhaustion, because we knew that the work had to be done. And it's just like, look, this is what we're here for. So I left the incident at 2 a.m. and then we had a debrief at Paddington Fire Station. I don't think my crew returned back to Tooting until 6 in the evening. I had the night off pre-booked the night off before, which I was contemplating taking out because I didn't like the fact that I was going to be away from my crew. My crew got back on at 8 o'clock, and they went through. Unfortunately, the brigade kept certain crews away from it, not to have to attend. But they had one under this morning, so the job continues. The job continues regardless.
And you fight another day, even though.
Yes, I mean, I think I've spoken to several of my mates this morning. A good friend of mine was one of the senior officers in charge, and he was in charge of the BA crews. His name is Pat Goldburn, and we had a chat this morning. And I was fortunate enough to be in the vicinity of the crews that were organising the BA wearers in the lobby, and this gentleman, good friend of mine, was absolutely amazing. He was so confident, composed in such difficult situations. He had some difficult decisions to make, and I couldn't be prouder of him in particular.
Pat Goldburn.
And all the rest of my colleagues. Pat Goldburn is his name.
Adrian, I'm so glad you had the opportunity to do that, because you don't get the credit you deserve. Thank you, mate, for everything you do.
James, it's a pleasure to speak to you, sir.
Oh, well,
thank you very much.
No, thank you. Come on. 12:55 is the time. Theo Usherwood is LBC's political editor. Take it up to the wire, Theo. What have you found?
It appears that the government has persistently overridden the advice of the coroner following the Lakanal House inquest into the deaths of 6 people in 2009. Firstly, the retrofitting of sprinklers. Francis Kirkham, who carried out the 2-month inquest back in 2013, wrote a Rule 33 letter to the Department for Communities and Local Government. The Secretary of State was Sir Eric Pickles, and the Borough of Southwark. In the letter, she said, "It is recommended that your authority consider the question of retrofitting of sprinkler systems in high-rise residential buildings." Now, officials at the DCLG wrote a response, which was sent to all social housing providers. I don't have that letter, but I have spoken to Sir Eric Pickles, who, as I said, was the Community Secretary, and he's told me that the advice was that such retrofitting should not be mandatory. So Sir Eric was actually very helpful. This is what he told me. After Lakanal House, we thought about the containment of the fire, which is what we did. Sometimes we can get obsessed about sprinkler systems. That is only part of the solution. The advice was that they should do an assessment. Sometimes it might be possible to fit sprinklers. Sometimes in a concrete building it might be difficult to do so. Then the second area, information boxes. These are boxes close to high-rise blocks which can contain plans, the locations of fire hydrants, access stairwells, lifts, emergency exits, all very useful to a firefighter on the ground. Francis Kirkham said the management company should be required to place all that information in those boxes following what happened at Lakanal House. Mr Pickles disagreed. In his letter back to Francis Kirkham, he wrote that the requirement was unnecessary and disproportionate. Of course, today it has emerged that firefighters had to use drones to get real-time footage of what happened in the building.
So even more questions to answer, and sort of moving up, and Eric Pickles no longer in Parliament at all, is he? But it's moving up the ladder of governments past and perhaps present. I want to hear that again, actually, Theo, slightly slower, but I'm out of time. It is, Majid Nawaz is up next. I've just got time to tell you that Sadiq Khan, the Mayor of London, is now demanding a full independent public inquiry into the fire at Grenfell Tower. He says the Metropolitan Police have confirmed that tragically 17 people are now known to have died in the terrible fire. We know that figure is likely to rise, and the Mayor concludes that under these circumstances, the full scale of the tragedy is becoming clear, and there are pressing questions which demand urgent answers, focusing particularly on this refurbishment. He says the inquiry needs to produce an interim report by the end of this summer at the latest. So we see the political response gathering pace. Just in conclusion, and I'm sure you'd agree with this, Theo, some people pointing out, Brendan in Surrey poses the question in the most articulate fashion, why Jeremy Corbyn is going around shaking hands and demonstrating compassion, whereas Theresa May didn't really speak to any of the victims. I think it's fairly simple. Jeremy Corbyn can go around dispensing compassion and kind words. Theresa May is going to be expected to provide answers, and it would be unrealistic to expect her to be able to provide those answers during a visit to the scene of the tragedy so soon, or while it is still unfolding. And I hope that takes us back to where we began the programme this morning and highlights the difference between politics, which this tragedy is absolutely steeped in, and politicking, which has no place at all at the table.